What if Bella and Edward separated? Episode 4. Married life couldn't have more different than I'd imagined it before Bella and I stood at that altar and said I do. It was better. Saying goodbye to my family again was hard, and it was even more trying on Bella. Not only was she leaving her father, who meant the world to her, and my equally as treasured family, but she was also parting from a woman she'd come to love just as much and her unborn sibling. Yet, an hour after we began our journey across country, her tears gradually slowed, and she and I started discussing our future together for the remainder of the drive. When we moved into our new apartment a month later, a few miles from Post, she laughed as I carried her over yet another threshold, but held on tight around my shoulders even after the door was closed behind us. We were home, our first real home together as husband and wife. I quickly learned that the honeymoon period of a marriage was called that for a damn good reason. I found myself getting up a little earlier in the morning than I did before, just for that few extra minutes to kiss her, or if I was really lucky, make love to her before I had to leave for the day. And days off were an entirely different story, where rising before 10 or 11 from our bed was rare for us. I felt anxious to return to her every evening, to come home to my beautiful wife, who was always there waiting at the door for me. And I loved watching her from across the kitchen table while we ate dinner and having her there to talk to each night about our days. Then making our way to bed and waiting for her to come out of the bathroom, eager to see which piece of lingerie she would choose for that evening. And the sex every time had been amazing and different, whether we were in the mood for slow and passionate, or ravenous and urgent. Nothing had been boring or routine for anything in the first 3 months of our marriage, especially after the night of her 18th birthday. The only thing that Bella really had difficulty adjusting to right off was the early rising at 0400. She'd never been a morning person for at least as long as I'd known her, yet even when I told her to just stay in bed and catch some more sleep, she grumpily insisted on getting up to make my breakfast while I showered and got ready for the day. I swore, if it wasn't for PT, my wife would succeed in making me fat with her cooking. It was with those thoughts in mind that I opened my eyes, glancing over at the clock on my nightstand to see that I had 10 more minutes before my alarm went off. I rolled onto my side and pressed my body to my wife's back, kissing along her bare shoulder and up her neck. She wiggled in my arms in response, causing me to groan as she shifted against my morning erection. "Good morning, baby," I whispered into her ear, my lips brushing softly on her lobe. "Edward, the alarm hasn't gone off yet, so I know I have at least a few more minutes," Bella grumbled, turning her face and nuzzling it into the pillow. We do," I replied in a suggestive tone, running my hand over her abdomen and up to her breast, squeezing it gently. "Plenty of time." "Are you serious?" Her muffled voice sounded from against the pillow. "You're really not complimenting your stamina in the husbandly duties much there, honey. And after twice last night, you didn't get enough?" "Nope, never," I murmured, circling my thumb around her nipple. "I could never get enough of this gorgeous body of yours. And I'll give you stamina. Baby, I love you." "But not going to happen this morning," Bella answered with an almost patronizing pat to my arm, slithering out of my hold and throwing the blankets off her. I rolled onto my stomach and buried my face into her pillow, and then felt her hand swat my ass through the sheet still covering me. "You are such a baby and hopelessly insatiable. But come on, you need a shower and I have to make your breakfast." I lifted my head and turned it toward her, watching as she slid on my boxers from the night before, and grabbing one of my PT shirts from my dresser drawer. "Oh, that is not fair. What am I supposed to wear all the way across the hall?" Bella rolled her eyes in response, twisting the waistband of my boxers at her hips, knowing exactly how it affected me when she wore my clothes. "First of all, don't even pretend like you have any issue walking around this house completely naked. Second, you only wore these for an hour last night after your shower, and my dresser is way over there. If you think I'm cooking in that, you better roll on over and keep dreaming." I whimpered teasingly when she pointed to the black negligee she'd worn the previous evening, and brought my eyes back up to her. "See, I took a shower last night. I should conserve the natural resources, or maybe take one with my sexy wife. You are not reporting for duty on Monday morning smelling like a weekend-long orgy," Bella replied and walked toward the bedroom door. "So now that I'm awake, you get up out of this bed and take a shower." "Fine," I said with a dramatic sigh, tossing the sheet off, and from the corner of my eye, caught sight of Bella scratching her ass as she left the room. "Okay, why can't I get away with that? But it's sexy when you do it." Bella appeared in the doorway again, glaring at me for a moment before crossing the room and grabbing her pillow and threw it at me. Her expression quickly shifted with her shriek when I caught her arm and pulled her back onto the bed again, rolling her over me to lay on my other side. Her laugh bubbled through as I kissed her and her arms circled around me, holding me against her. I parted from her lips and brushed my nose along hers, reaching over to silence the alarm and feeling her fingers tracing over the skin of my back. "I love you. I love you too," she whispered, kissing me again quickly. "But you're still not getting any until tonight. You need to get to work and I have a million things to do today." I rolled off her as she began to rise again and finally did as well, making my way across the hall to the bathroom and catching the nice ass remark from Bella down the hall. When I walked out to the kitchen a half hour later, she was setting my breakfast on the table and she looked at me, sighing heavily. "You did it, didn't you?" I tried to hide my smirk as I sat down, grabbing a piece of toast and taking a bite with a shrug. "Did what, baby?" Bella raised an eyebrow at me, and then her features relaxed. "That's fine, you know the drill. You get off, so do I." "But you didn't want you," I replied with wide eyes, feeling arousal stirring within me at the image her suggestion conjured in my mind. "Doesn't mean I never want to while my sexy husband is still at work," Bella said deviously, and my head fell back with a groan. She moved behind my chair and rested her hands on my shoulders, leaning down to press her lips softly to mine. "I'm equally as insatiable, baby, just not so much at 4 in the morning. Go for 3 tonight?" I asked, wiggling my eyebrows at her and laughing as she thwopped the back of my head. "Overachiever." "I'm going for my shower now," Bella replied, walking away. "What, no kiss goodbye?" I called after her and she stopped, looking over her shoulder at me. "I gotta stop for gas on the way in." "You just got a kiss, Edward," she answered with her hands on her hips. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms over my chest. "You know what I want. With morning breath, for better or worse, baby," I answered with a joking shrug. She came back over to me and stepped between my legs, taking my face between her hands and kissing me soundly. I could taste the bacon she'd obviously sampled while she was cooking and ran my fingers along the backs over her smooth thighs. When she pulled away, I nodded and she gave me an odd look. "Yeah, go take care of that morning breath. The in sickness and health is about to be put to the test." Bella snarled and pushed off my chest, storming out of the kitchen. "I hate you sometimes, Edward Cullen." "I love you too, Mrs. Cullen," I said, and she didn't reply, but I heard her laugh just before the bathroom door closed. Bella really was an amazing wife, exceeding even my expectations. She took very good care of me in our home, and I never wanted for anything if she could possibly prevent it. I knew she got a little homesick at times, especially after phone and Skype calls with her dad and Sue, seeing how much bigger she was getting each time with what we'd been recently informed were Bella's twin baby brothers. Yet, she never complained and always did her best to keep it from showing. Periodic visits from my grandmother seemed to help, as it gave Bella someone to talk to and visit with. She'd had difficulty making friends, living off-post as we did, even though she had made acquaintance with Emma Bishop, my buddy Riley's wife. However, they had also welcomed their first baby a few months before, and nothing was the same as having Alice and Rose around for her. As Sue's due date began looming, with only weeks left to go, I noticed very conflicting emotions in Bella. Anytime she would start talking about going home for a few days when the babies came, she would sound so excited until she looked at me, and then she would immediately begin apologizing. "I'm sorry, baby. I really don't mean to sound like I'm unhappy here at all. I just can't wait to see my dad and Sue. And I'm going to be a big sister. I'm excited, that's all," Bella said, wrapping her arms around my waist and pressing her cheek to my chest. "I'm so happy here with you, Edward. You know that, right?" "Yes, I know that, Bella. You don't need to apologize to me for that," I replied with my lips brushing against her hair. "You know you can stay for more than a weekend, don't you? I know how much you miss them all." And that was when my Bella's fierceness returned, lifting her head from my chest and shaking it insistently. "No, if a weekend pass is all you can get, that's all I get too. My place is where my husband is. We promised each other that we would never be apart again once we were married, and that's not going to change. As much as I love my dad and Sue, and I'm looking forward to meeting my brothers, I'm your wife, and this is where I want to be, with you." I couldn't help but smile at the fire in her tone and the way her hands fisted on my t-shirt, pulling me closer and meeting my lips with hers. I wrapped my arms tightly around her, holding my beautiful wife flush against me. "I love you so damn much, Bella." "I love you too," she whispered, her hands gliding down my chest and encircling my waist. I felt her fingers slip beneath the hem of my shirt and trace indistinct patterns on the small of my back. "I think it's time for bed, don't you?" I smirked at her suggestive tone, a sudden shift from the seriousness of our previous conversation. It was only 9 o'clock, much earlier than usual, but who was I to complain? "Yes, ma'am." When I began to move away to head toward our bedroom, Bella gripped me more firmly and pulled me closer to her, brushing her lips on my chin. I was thinking of something a little more spontaneous tonight. My eyebrows rose sharply as she began raising my shirt from my body and over my head. She tossed it aside and it landed across the room in front of the television, turning my face back to her and kissing me heatedly. I groaned against her lips and lifted her into my arms, and her legs wrapped tight around my waist. It never ceased to amaze me that, after 7 months of marriage and settling into the daily routine of being responsible adults as husband and wife, we still made love every night we could. We hadn't lost even a hint of the passionate desire we felt for each other on our honeymoon. She wanted and needed me as much as she always had, but we'd never really been as spontaneous as we were while we were dating. In our own home, we could take our time and enjoy the building up of anticipation every single night, without any worry about seizing every moment we had together or disruption by anyone. And I wasn't complaining at all. Yet I couldn't deny that there were times that I really missed it, and wanted my wife to just tear off my clothes and take me. To see that desperate need in her eyes telling me that she just couldn't wait another second to have me, even to change into something sexy. And that was exactly what I saw as I carried her toward our room, the intense gaze while she shed her shirt and bra in the hallway, trusting my hold on her implicitly, before we could even reach the door. I set her down beside our bed, preparing to reclaim her lips with mine, but she shoved me down onto the mattress and quickly climbed on top of me. Her teeth dragged along my bottom lip when she leaned forward to kiss me again, and my fingers gripped her sides as she rocked her hips over my heart in erection. Even with all the sex we'd had in the past few months, the heat of that moment was driving me so close to release far more quickly than I wanted to. "Baby Bella, you're gonna make me come. Isn't that kinda the point?" Bella whispered in a breathy voice, kissing along my jaw to my ear. "No, baby, I mean like now," I groaned, lowering my hands to her hips to still them and swallowing hard. My breaths were coming in heavy pants, and I closed my eyes, trying to calm myself a little. "Well," she began in a soft tone, raising her lips back to mine and brushing them teasingly, "I think we can fix that little problem." "Oh fuck, baby," I whispered as she pressed her lips to my chest in the space between where my tags lay, before rising and sitting back on my thighs. Her gaze never left mine as her fingers began working my belt and pants, and she started crawling backward down my legs and taking my clothing with her. Bella's eyes were dark and fierce, full of hunger, and they did nothing to abate my feeling of arousal for her. I attempted to sit up and pull her back to me, but she held her hand out to push against my chest and shoved me down onto my back again. A devious smirk appeared on her lips as she unfastened her jeans and slid them down her legs, stepping out of them in her underwear to climb back onto the bed and wrapped her slender fingers around my length. My heart pounded ferociously as her hand glided along me in slow strokes, quickly building me up to that peak again. "Bella, oh God." I encircled my fingers around her wrist and closed my eyes in an attempt to restrain myself and restrict her movements. I wanted her so damn badly, and at the rate she was going, I would release long before I was inside her. The feel of her lips on my wrist caused my eyes to open abruptly and look down at her. "Don't worry, baby. I am only just getting started with the plans I have for my sexy husband tonight." I watched as she kissed along my hand and brought her lips to hover over me, smiling one last time before taking me into her mouth. My hands gripped the covers beneath me, and I released a low, deep groan. It had been a long time since we'd done anything beyond sex, and as much as I enjoyed making love to her, the sight and feel of her lips around me was absolutely incredible, almost too incredible. "Oh, fuck, Bella, I'm almost there, baby." Bella's hands rested on my hips, and she increased her motions, massaging me with her lips and tongue. My fists clenched tightly around the fabric in my hands and a groan rumbled in my chest with my release, and she didn't cease until I throbbed for the last time inside her mouth. She kissed her way up my abdomen and chest, straddling my hips again, as she brushed her lips against the corner of mine. "Feel better?" I growled softly, gripping her sides with my hands and flipping her onto her back. Her giggle echoed through the room, but it was silenced when my mouth sealed over hers, replaced by a soft moan, and her arms encircled me tightly. My fingers lowered to run along the inside of her thigh, and up to the slickened skin between her legs. A sharp gasp sounded from her, followed by a high-pitched whimper as I slid 2 fingers inside her, and her lips parted from mine when her neck arched in response. "I'll feel even better in a bit. I get off, you get off, remember?" Bella's nails scratched lightly against my scalp as I lowered my head to her breast, closing my lips around her pert nipple while driving my fingers deep inside her. "Edward, please." I smiled against her skin when I felt her other hand reaching for me, and I pulled my hips back, brushing my lips along her ribs. "I'm not nearly done with my sexy wife either." Bella's gaze met mine as I began lowering down her body and lifted her leg to the other side of my head to drape over my shoulder. The sight of her writhing in anticipation was such an arousing one, and I retracted my fingers to glide along her once before replacing them with my mouth. Her ankle dug into my side, and I felt the muscles of her thigh tense against my face. Every sound and movement from her clearly depicted how much my wife still desired and needed me, and the taste of her arousal on my tongue had my own stirring again rapidly. I wanted her badly, but I was determined to give her as much pleasure as she'd just given me. I really was a lucky fucking man. Bella's moans became a series of whimpers and her hips ground against me. I brought my hand to run along the outside of her thigh as my tongue circled her, and hers clasped either side of my head, pressing me closer. "Oh God, baby, so close. Please don't stop." I only gave a soft hum of acknowledgement, which caused her back to arch and her legs to grip my face between them. She panted heavily with deep grunts until she fell completely silent, but her entire body tense with the rush surging through her. Did I mention that my wife was fucking beautiful? Damn. Her legs slowly relaxed and fell to the sides, and her arms dropped to the bed. She finally began breathing again, and I watched as her devastatingly gorgeous smile returned to her face, and her eyes opened to look at me. "Come here." I grinned as I brushed my lips against her one more time, causing her hips to lurch toward me, and then crawled up her body to settle between her legs and kiss her soundly. I felt her arms wrap around my shoulders and her tongue glide along my lip as I pressed inside her, and her nails dug into the back of my neck. Her leg hooked over my hip, pulling me further into her with every thrust, and I needed to part from her lips to breathe. It felt so fucking good, and the heat between us was palpable, made more intense by the force of her gaze as it held mine. "I love you so much, Bella." "I love you too," she whispered in a breathless pant, her fingers dragging along my face urgently to bring me back to her. I brushed my lips on hers teasingly and rose up onto my arms, retracting my hips from her for a moment, and then driving back into her swiftly. "Oh, fuck. Regretting getting me off first yet, baby?" I said with a chuckle after another firm thrust, and her fingers clawed into my biceps. Bella's head moved quickly back and forth, and her hips began to roll against my movements. "No, never. Totally reaping the benefits of it right now." "Oh really?" I asked with a raised eyebrow, and she bit her lips to hide her smirk, nodding in response. I lowered my lips to hers and kissed her softly, and then pulled away to sit back on my calves. Bella's eyes widened and her jaw fell, rising up on her elbows and glaring at me. "Oh no, you did not just do that." I couldn't stop the laugh that rumbled in my chest at the look on her face, but held my hand out for her. "Come here, baby." Bella slipped her fingers around mine, and I lifted her up to kneel in front of me, her eyes flickering over my face curiously. Her body melted into my arms as I slid them around her and met her lips with mine, eliciting soft moans from each of us. "Edward, please, I need you." "Turn around," I murmured softly against her lips, and she gazed at me heatedly. I took her by the waist and shifted her to face the headboard, and her body trembled again with anticipation. Memories flooded through my mind of the first time I had her in her bed over 2 years before, and I made her completely mine. Just like that, her hands gripping the headboard as I claimed her body as I'd finally known I'd done so with her heart. "Hold on tight, baby." "Oh shit," Bella exclaimed, her fingers closing tightly around the brass bar in front of her when I entered her again. Her back arched more with each of my movements, and her long ponytail draped down between her shoulder blades. I released one of her hips with my hand and brought it to her hair tie, pulling it loose and watching her soft, brown strands cascade down her back. Much better." Bella gave a breathy laugh, but shivered as she pressed back against me, wordlessly urging me to continue. My hands gripped either side of her waist, needing no further encouragement, and began my urgent movements within her again. Soft, indistinct murmurs escaped her in grunts, and her knuckles started to whiten as she gripped the rail more firmly with each one of my thrusts. I was about to reach the brink again, but I wanted to feel her do so again before I did. I lowered my chest to press against her and slid my fingers across her abdomen, settling between her legs and rubbing her briskly. She gasped and threw her head back against my shoulder, releasing one hand from the headboard and curling it around my neck. "Go with me, Bella, let me feel you." I could taste the salt on her skin as I kissed along her shoulder, and her hold tightened at my hairline, just as I felt her clench around me, and driving me to join her with a loud groan. When our bodies finally began to relax, I rolled off her and onto my back beside her, fighting to catch my breath. Bella collapsed at my side, and I turned my head to look at her to find her gaze locked on the ceiling, her chest still heaving as she recovered as well. "God, that was fucking amazing. I've been wondering when you would do that again." My eyes widened, and she laughed as she brought hers to meet them. "You wanted me to? You could have said something. It's not as much fun if I have to ask for it, Edward," she replied, rolling toward me and palming my face before brushing her lips on mine. "And it was totally worth the wait. You've worn me out." "Already?" I teased with raised eyebrows. "It's still early, baby." Bella rolled her eyes with a chuckle and turned over onto her side, facing away from me, and reached up to turn off the beside lamp. "Can't have too much of a good thing or it starts to lose its appeal." "Oh really?" I replied sarcastically and then slid under the blankets, covering us both over and folding my hands over my chest in a huff. "Well, if that's the case, maybe I should withhold longer next time." Bella laughed again, but it soon fell, and her hand reached back for me. I gently took it and she guided my arm around her middle, nestling her body back into me. "Could you just hold me for a little while?" My brow furrowed as I slid my other arm beneath her head to wrap around her, and felt her fingers slide between mine on her stomach. "What's up, sweetheart?" "Nothing," she whispered and turned her head to look back at me with a contented smile. "I'm very happy. Nothing's changed and that is the best feeling in the world." I gave her a gentle kiss and hugged my arms around her more securely. "Nothing ever is going to change the way I feel about you. I'll always love and want you this much, even when I'm old, wrinkled, and ugly." Bella teased against my lips as her fingers traced along my arm around her shoulders. "Well," I replied sarcastically, and she pinched my skin, but I brushed a kiss on her neck with a soft sigh. "You'll always be beautiful to me, my beautiful Bella, and you'll always be my sexy Edward, even when you're bald with a beer gut," she whispered with a chuckle. "I mean, you're pretty close now as it is." I growled playfully into her hair and tickled her waist beneath the blanket, causing her to squeal. "I'm nowhere near bald yet, and I blame my wife's cooking for the other part. Maybe she should stop feeding me so well." "That is never going to happen," she answered and hugged my arms against her, sighing softly. "I like knowing that I can take care of you too." "You do, baby. Very good care of me," I whispered, kissing her neck, and we laid there, silently holding each other without speaking again for another hour, before we began drifting off to sleep. When Bella's phone rang and woke us, I opened my eyes to gaze at the clock, as I took note of the still pitch-dark room around us. 2 a.m. calls were never good, and I extracted my arms from around her, shaking her shoulder gently. "Bella, it's yours." Bella groaned and reached over to her nightstand to grab it, mumbling a groggy hello to answer. She suddenly stiffened and sat up, her eyes wide open. "What?" I rose up beside her, gazing at her worriedly and running my hand along her arm. "Baby, what's wrong?" Bella covered the mouthpiece with her fingers and looked to me. "Sue's on her way to the hospital. Her water broke." Following that early morning phone call, Bella rose and began frantically preparing for our trip to Washington. Once she had gotten the reassurance that Sue was all right, and that 3 weeks early was not uncommon with twins, she relaxed some, but not much. She still had the worry that I wouldn't get a pass in time, as it was already Wednesday, and she feared that it would be another week before we'd be able to go home to meet her brothers. Adam and Aiden Swan were born within minutes of each other later that afternoon, and Bella had excitedly met me at the door when I returned home, with the texted picture of 2 tiny baby boys displayed on her phone. Once again, I tried to convince her to head to Washington without me if I couldn't join her right away, and I would the instant I was able, but she still adamantly refused. Fortunately, her fears did not come to pass, and my leave was granted for the weekend, and I called her immediately to tell her to go ahead and book the flight for Friday evening. The price of the tickets was well worth the exuberance I heard in her voice as she thanked me over and over. When we finally landed at SeaTac late Friday night, Bella could barely contain her excitement, squeezing my hand tightly all the way through the airport until she spotted her father at baggage claim. Tears began streaming down her face, and she released me, running toward him and jumping into his waiting embrace. I approached them and his eyes met mine, keeping one arm secured around his daughter and holding out his other hand to me. I shook it firmly, and he mouthed thank you before he let go to return to hugging his daughter. "I've missed you so much, Dad," Bella cried into his shoulder and lifted her head once he returned the sentiment, looking at him anxiously. "How are Sue and the boys?" "They're good. She's really looking forward to seeing you guys. Should we grab your bags and get out of here?" he asked, his arm remaining around her as she hugged against his side. "Edward's got everything," Bella replied, nodding to me where I stood with our 2 small bags for the visit. "Didn't see the point in checking luggage for only a couple of days." Chief Swan smiled and noticeably secured his hold on her as we began walking toward the exit. Even with 2 brand new babies at home, there was no denying how much he loved and missed his little girl, and was already dreading letting her go again. I sat in the back seat of the cruiser, watching Bella talk animatedly with her father all the way back to Forks. It was the most I'd heard him speak at one time since the day I met him. He was obviously tired, but ecstatic to be a father again, and boasted about his beautiful boys. He also inquired about our life in Virginia, despite his frequent phone calls with Bella of the past few months, seemingly wanting to see with his own eyes that his daughter was happy, without the distortion of a webcam image. He appeared satisfied for the time being, though not for the first time. I could see the hints of loneliness in Bella's eyes, as she relayed the fact that she hadn't made many friends out there yet, and how much she was looking forward to seeing Alice and Rose again. I knew it was difficult for her to make friends, especially being one of the youngest wives on post. At 18, she couldn't exactly go out to the bars and such for girls' nights out that many of them would have on Fridays, and she saw that as our time together as well. Even when I myself turned 21 in a few months' time, I still couldn't see that changing for me either. However, the thought of her feeling that loneliness was troublesome. In that respect, I felt like such a failure as her husband. I provided everything I could for her, but I still left her alone all day, with no way to fill her time other than taking care of our home and daily errands, essentially being a housewife. I had my buddies on post that made my days seem not quite as long, even missing Bella as I did, and she had next to no one. How could I not feel like a crappy husband? We finally arrived at the Swan home just after 1 in the morning, and the smile returned to Bella's face when she saw Sue standing in the doorway with one of the boys in her arms. She barely gave the car a chance to stop before she stepped out, and made her up the walk to greet her father's girlfriend. "Edward, come see Aiden," she called back to me as her father and I were walking toward the house, already with the baby cradled in her arms. "He's so beautiful, Dad." "Thank you, Bells, but let the poor guy get inside first," he replied with his hand patting my shoulder. I chuckled tiredly and received a hug and kiss on the cheek from Sue before I turned to Bella, looking down at the tiny baby in her hold. "Hey there, little man, a little past your bedtime, isn't it?" Sue laughed and shook her head. "Aiden is our night owl like his dad, while Adam is already sleeping straight through. They literally couldn't be any more different if they weren't twins. You just couldn't wait to meet your big sister and brother-in-law, could you?" Bella cooed at the baby, kissing his forehead. Brother-in-law, now that sounded weird. I was the brother-in-law to 2-day-old infants. Definitely not something that just anyone could say. "Well, I'm sure you two are tired after the flight and drive, and Adam will make sure the whole neighborhood is up in a few hours," Sue said with a chuckle, and all 3 of us joined in. "I made up the sleeper sofa for you, and we can catch up more over breakfast in the morning." Bella whimpered softly as Sue reached for the baby, kissing him one more time, and reluctantly handing him over. "Good night, beautiful boy." We said goodnight to Charlie and Sue as well as they walked upstairs, and I took Bella's hand, leading her over to the pull-out bed. Despite the excitement of coming home, we'd both been up for nearly 22 hours straight, and it had been a very long day. I'd barely had time to change when I'd gotten home before we were heading off to the airport, and I really wanted nothing more than to sleep. Bella, on the other hand, was so restless that she continued talking quietly as she changed for bed. "I can't wait to see Adam. He's even tinier than Aiden," Sue said. "That's so hard to imagine. Did you see those tiny fingers? What time are we going to see your parents tomorrow?" I laid back on the bed and groaned in relief, feeling all my muscles begin to release as she slid in beside me. "Baby, I love you, but you're making my brain dizzy, and I'm seriously a wink away from zonking out completely." I'm sorry, honey, she whispered, pressing her body to my side and kissing me gently. I'm just so excited to be here. Go to sleep. I closed my eyes and pursed my lips in an air kiss to her, and that was the last thing I remembered before I found myself waking to the sound of voices from the kitchen. Oh, my hubby must be up. The snoring stopped, I heard my wife say, and I rolled my eyes. Oh, shush it, baby, I mumbled, sitting up and rubbing my face with my hands, and then stood to slide my jeans back on. How do you manage to sleep next to that, Bella? A freight train makes less of a racket than that. Another familiar voice met my ears, and I couldn't help but smile. If I remember correctly, you are not one to talk, buddy, I said as I entered the room, finding my best friend sitting at the table, smirking at me. Jasper stood and made his way over to me, embracing me tightly. So damn good to have you home, Edward. Aw. The high-pitched shriek caught my attention, and I looked across the room to see Sarah Lynn standing on her mother's lap, bouncing excitedly. Alice smiled and set the little girl down on the floor. Go get Uncle Edward. I released Jasper and watched as Sarah Lynn toddled over to me with her little arms reaching up, repeating her wail of her version of Edward, and giggling as I lifted her into my embrace. Oh my God, baby girl, you're getting way too big. You need to stop that. The whole room laughed at my teasing of her, but I could feel tears burning in my eyes as I closed them and pressed my lips to her soft hair. I missed my family and friends so much, but that little girl was especially precious to me. I still carried her baby picture in my wallet, and seeing how much she'd grown and changed in the 7 months I'd been away reminded me of the sacrifices I needed to make as well for the job I loved. Yet, there was also the relief that, despite the time and distance, she had not forgotten me. With no small amount of thanks to Jasper and Alice, we'd kept up with weekly Skype calls, so she could see my face and hear my voice, and I was especially grateful for it in that moment. I leaned over to kiss Alice's cheek, which she gently returned. It's good to see you, Alice. You, too. Maybe we can get this little girl to take a nap at some point today, now that she's got her Uncle Edward finally, she replied with a chuckle, tickling her daughter's chubby leg as she snuggled into my chest. Don't I get a good morning, or are you too caught up in your other woman? Bella said from across the table, and I glanced over to her, staring at me expectantly with a sleeping baby in her arms. I adjusted Sarah Lynn onto my hip and made my way over to my wife, leaning down to brush a chaste kiss on her lips. Good morning, beautiful. This is Adam? Bella nodded and her eyes lowered to the infant again, running her fingertip lightly over his forehead. He wiggled at her touch and his eyes opened, revealing the same shade of brown as his father and big sister. Aside from the caramel-colored skin, he looked so much more like Bella than his twin, right down to the exact same full set of lips. He's beautiful, I said, and suddenly felt a tiny hand come to my cheek, turning my face toward the disgruntled look on little Sarah Lynn's features. You're still my best girl, sweetheart. Her lips turned up to a smile again, and when I leaned forward to kiss her again, she puckered them to meet mine in an exaggerated smooch. God, how I'd missed her. She's learned jealousy very well from her mother, Jasper joked, earning a playful glare from Alice, and then kissed the top of her head. You know it's true, baby. Yeah, well, my little girl knows a good man when she's got one. Nothing wrong with that, Alice replied proudly. Though, I'll hate to see what happens when these two decide to join the ranks of parenthood. I'm leaving that privilege to my brother for a while. Rosalie's grown relentless in the baby fever department. I'm sure it won't be long before we have another addition to the Cullen clan. I've still got 2 years left of my contract with the army, I stated as I sat beside Bella and settled Sarah Lynn on my lap. I'm good with being a brother-in-law and uncle for a while yet. Yeah, me too, Bella added softly, gazing down at her little brother with his tiny fist between her fingers. The trembling cry from Aiden made its way down the stairs and her eyes lit up, turning her gaze to Sue. Can I go get him? Sue nodded and lifted Adam from Bella's arms, and we all watched as she practically ran from the room and up the stairs. I wouldn't be so sure about that, man, Jasper said, and I looked over to him with narrowed eyes. I'm just saying, baby fever strikes hard, and these things happen in threes. 1, 2, 3, I replied seriously, pointing to the 2 children in the room and then toward the ceiling to Bella's old room, which had become the nursery. We're still content just being newlyweds. Chief Swan, who had been silent the entire time, came to sit beside me in the chair that Bella had just vacated. Good man. Visiting my family for dinner that evening felt amazing, and as much as I loved my wife's cooking, there were things I still missed about my mom's, namely, her baked macaroni and cheese she made that night, and her apple pie for dessert. I was also relieved to see my father looking as incredible and healthy as he was. Being so far away for months, I had hoped for the best, feared the worst. Hearing that he'd been declared cancer-free months earlier had eased my mind greatly. But as with when I returned for our wedding, seeing him with my own eyes was what I needed to be sure. There were no signs on him that, about a year before, he had undergone cancer treatment. At the table that night, he'd gained back the weight he'd lost. His blonde hair was nearly as full as I remembered it from when I was growing up, though still cropped short, and the sparkle in his eyes had returned to its full intensity, especially when gazing at my mother and his family, including Bella and Rosalie. He was my dad again. Bella was noticeably quieter than she had been in the past when we'd all gathered at my parents' home for a family dinner, however, and that worried me. She did get a little more animated when talking about her brothers and how married life was treating her when asked by my brother, her hand never leaving mine unless it rested on my thigh beneath the table. Otherwise, she seemed very distracted. After dinner, the girls retreated to the kitchen while I joined my father and brother in the newly refurbished basement of my parents' house for a game of pool. "Marriage suits you, bro," Emmett said as he leaned over the table to make his shot, and then grumbled under his breath when he missed, reaching for his beer. "I have to admit, I didn't know what to expect when you came home this time. But you and Bella are just as disgustingly mushy as ever." "You say that like it's a bad thing, Em. I just happen to be very in love with my wife," I replied with my eyes scanning for my own shot, lining up my cue stick and calling the pocket. "What are they teaching you out there? Sniper skills?" Emmett mumbled when I sank the ball and sighed as I circled the table. "Don't be a sore loser, Emmett," our father said with a chuckle from his seat beside us. "I'm not. I just used to be able to whip my baby brothers a butt in pool," Emmett replied, and I found it somewhat humorous that, even as grown men with wives of our own, we both still censored ourselves in the presence of our father, giving him the respect he both deserved and earned. It also made me feel worthy of calling myself Carlisle Cullen's son, seeing the pride in his eyes as he noticed as well. "And no, it's not a bad thing, Edward, just surprising. I love my wife too. But even Rosie and I mellowed out after about 3 months, and now it's all about ovulation cycles, body temps and peak days." I missed my next shot and watched the ball bounce off the side, stepping back to clear the way for my brother, and folding my hands over the tip of the stick. "I thought you wanted a kid, Emmett. Don't get me wrong, I do. A lot," Emmett emphasized and looked back in a preemptive apology to our father before turning to me again, lowering his voice. "It's just that, once the baby fever hit, it became don't touch me if any of those factors are off." "There's nothing wrong with my hearing, son," Dad commented in amusement from beside us, and Emmett shifted uncomfortably. "I'm also not ignorant to the ways of baby making. I had 2 of them myself, you know." "Sorry, Dad," Emmett said in an uncharacteristically quiet tone, to which our father only grinned, and then he looked back to me. "Just wait until Bella gets bit by the bug, you'll see what I mean. Any and all spontaneity goes right out the window." It was my turn to shift in my spot and take a long pull from my water. "Not something I have to worry about for a while yet. She's only 18, we have plenty of time." "Yeah, that's what I thought too." And then Rose decided she had changed her mind about waiting a full year, and wanted to start trying the night of your wedding, he replied, pointing to me. "More information than I needed, thank you," I mumbled as I moved back over to the table, but I was so on edge, I couldn't concentrate. I loved Bella more than life itself, and of course I wanted children with her someday. My mind had not changed about that, but nor did it as to the timing or the feeling behind forcing my kids to be army brats. All the baby talk, in conjunction with the offness of Bella's demeanor that day, was starting to really get to me. BPOV. "I just don't know what we're doing wrong," Rosalie said in a sad tone, shaking her head and staring down at the counter. "I've been to the doctor, I'm taking my vitamins, eating right, and even denying my husband more often than not, and still, nothing." Esme and I sat on either side of her, my hand covering hers and our mother-in-law's arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes it takes longer than others, sweetheart. Carlisle and I were together for more than 4 years when I became pregnant with Emmett, and then Edward came along a little over a year later. And we didn't entirely take all the precautions we could have either, even before we were married. It will happen when the time is right." He wants a baby so much. Hell, if he had his way, we would have started trying right after Saralyn was born. He is just amazing with her, and I know he'll be a great dad, and I want to make that happen for him. For us. I've never hated my periods more than I do right now, Rosalie replied, running the fingers of her free hand into her hair to hold it back from her face, and the look on it broke my heart. The sadness and frustration from her tone was reflected in her eyes, and it was such a stark contrast to the Rosalie I had come to know over the years. It was obvious how much she wanted to be a mother, in equal amounts to her desire to make Emmett a father. I could not imagine the pain she was feeling, and honestly, I hadn't really considered it much since marrying Edward until that trip to Forks. Seeing and holding my brothers had affected me in a way I hadn't expected, and then, seeing the emotion on my husband's face when he held Saralyn that way. He'd always been just as amazing with that little girl as Emmett was, sometimes even more so, from the moment he held her for the first time in that hospital room. Yet the tears in his eyes when she walked to him, and he saw how much she'd grown, despite his efforts to hide them, were clear as day. I couldn't help envisioning our own little girl walking to her daddy like that for the first time someday, or how he would cradle her to his chest as he had with Saralyn. It was the first time in a while I'd seriously given it any thought. I felt Rosalie's hand turn in mine and squeeze it gently, and I brought my eyes back to her. Just be glad you don't have to worry about this for a while. You and Edward still look so happy. We are, aren't you? I asked curiously, and my fingers wove between hers. Of course, I am. I love Emmett so much, and I know he loves me too. It's just stressful, you know, Rosalie replied with a weak smile. Maybe you two should just let nature take its course, Esme started in her never-failing motherly tone. Perhaps the stress from all the effort is being counterproductive? Rosalie shrugged and leaned her head on Esme's shoulder, her body relaxing a little in the loving support of her embrace. Baby, I heard Edward's voice call to me from the kitchen doorway, and we all looked back to him. Rosalie righted herself and wiped her fingers across her cheeks to remove the tears that had fallen, before offering a slightly more convincing smile. Everything okay up here? I nodded and slid off the stool I was seated upon, making my way to him and wrapping my arm around his waist. Yep, just girl talk. You ready to go? Yeah, with the flight tomorrow and all, we probably should, Edward replied, his fingers lightly gripping my side. Esme and Rosalie both walked over to say goodbye, hugging us both. His mother held her son particularly tight, and to that, I could definitely relate, and it tugged at my heart. Even as his wife, the memory of each goodbye I'd had to say to him as his girlfriend never lost its intensity, and I remembered how much harder and more painful each one had been from the time before. I couldn't bear to think of how it would feel as a mother. Don't you two be strangers now, and come back soon, okay? Rosalie said as she released me and turned to Edward once Esme finally pulled away, taking her turn and embracing him. We miss you both so much. We miss you too. We'll at least be home for Christmas, Edward mumbled against her hair and kissing her cheek as she extracted herself slowly from his arms. Love you. And you, Mom. They each returned the sentiment, and Edward took my hand, leading me toward the door to say farewell to his father and brother as well. The drive back to my father's house was quiet, but I didn't dare break it. I knew Edward hated that part of every visit to his family, and with only a few hours spent with them and 9 more months having to pass before he would likely see them again, I thought it best to just let him process it on his own, and not press him to talk about it just yet. However, it continued through the night as he lay beside me, saying goodbye to Sue and the boys the next day, and then my father at the airport, and the entire trip home, until we were in our own bed again. I snuggled up to his side and brushed my lips against his jaw, but he barely even flinched, his eyes focused on the ceiling above us. Where are you? I asked softly, running my hand over his chest. Right here, he replied simply, wrapping his arm around my shoulders and kissing my lips. You don't seem like you're here. What's wrong? I inquired, and his gaze met mine with a different look in it than I'd ever seen, and I didn't know what to think anymore. Is it leaving your family again? Did I do something? What? Edward's eyes closed and he sighed, his cheek resting on the pillow beneath him. Well, yeah, I wish we had more time, and December feels forever away still, but, I repeated, and he drew in a deep breath through his nose, yet didn't move to continue. But, Edward exhaled heavily before opening his eyes, and there was that look again. Bella, we are still on the same page on the kids thing, right? I gazed at him in shock and rose up on my elbow, looking down at his face. Aren't we? Edward rolled onto his side, propping his head up on his hand, and bringing us face to face. I hope so. It's just watching you with your bothers and all the baby talk going on up there. I was hoping that you weren't starting to change your mind. I feel like a complete dick saying this, but I really don't want kids just yet. 2-3 years down the line, sure, I'll be all for making a baby with you, but I can't see that changing before then. I don't want to hurt or upset you, but I can't be the father I want to be right now. I'm not like my father in that respect. I love my dad very much, and I don't resent him for the choices he made, but he was content in the way he balanced his family and the army, and I spent more of my childhood without him than I did with him there, with or without deployments, you know that. And with moving every 2 years or so, and uprooting everything, new schools, new friends, I can't do that to my kids, or their mother. I brought my hand to his face and pressed a soft kiss to his lips, stroking his cheek gently with my fingertips as we parted. I know, and don't worry, we're still on the same page. As much as I would love to have your baby, I'm nowhere near ready for that. And I know you aren't either. We'll have our kids when the time is right for us. Edward's features finally relaxed, and his arms slid around me tightly, lowering us to lie back down, and kissing me firmly. Thank you, baby. I feel a little less like a dick now. I chuckled against his lips and held him against me. Well, maybe I could help take your mind off it? It has been since Tuesday, after all. That's gotta be a record for us since we've been married, and I've missed you. A soft groan left Edward's chest as I wrapped my leg around his, pulling his body on top of me to settle between them. I'm really liking this spontaneous thing. Yeah, I figured you might. I whispered against his lips and began guiding his boxers over his hips. Mission accomplished, distraction achieved. Baby, I've been thinking, Edward said to me one night, a few days later, as we sat on the couch, only half watching the terrible show on the television. Oh, that could be dangerous, I teased, turning toward him and draping my legs over his lap, laughing when he rolled his eyes. What's up? Have you ever thought about maybe joining one of those groups on Post for Spouses? He asked seriously, and I lifted my hand to meet his on my shoulder. Why? You think I'm having trouble adjusting or something? Really, I'm fine. After all this time, I'm practically a pro, I replied with a confident smile, pecking his lips with mine. No, you're actually doing great with it, baby. I'm not worried about that, he answered, squeezing my fingers reassuringly. It's just that there's only so much you can clean the house or run to the PX, or spend time cooking, or books you can read and TV you can watch, before you start running out of things to do. And I didn't mean a support group or anything, just maybe something fun for you to do with the other wives. Make some friends so you don't have to be stuck home all the time. I'm not the only one that matters here, Bella. I want you to be happy, too. I am, I said emphatically, gazing at him in disbelief. What would make you think that I wasn't happy? Edward gave a slight shrug, running his thumb slowly along my hand. You just seem like you're really lonely when I'm not around. I lowered my eyes to his chest and leaned my head onto his shoulder. I hated to admit that he was right. Whenever I'd finished cleaning the house or running my errands for the day with way too much time on my hands before I could start making dinner, I'd find myself thumbing distractedly through a book or flipping through channels on the television. It was at those times that I missed being able to call up Rose or Alice, or even Esme and Sue, to have some coffee and girl time, even more. I just felt so out of place, even just at the PX, around the other wives, between my age and high level of social awkwardness. However, I never wanted my husband to notice or feel the least bit guilty about it. I loved him so much, and I wouldn't trade being there with him for anything. So I looked back to him and smiled, trying to ease his worry. What, do you have spies checking on me? Are you forgetting who you're talking to here? I've never been much of a socializer. I can count my friends back in forks on one hand, and I married my best friend. That's all I need, Edward. Are you forgetting who you're talking to? Your brave face is great, and I love you for it. But you still really suck at lying, Edward replied against my forehead before pressing a kiss to it. Just promise me that you'll think about trying one group. Maybe you could find something with art and start drawing again. Or a book club. I narrowed my eyes at him and lifted my head. You've already looked into them, haven't you? I may have asked around a little, he answered with another shrug, but quickly looked down. Yeah, that's right, Cullen. You suck at lying, too. Tuesdays at 1100, and Thursdays at 1400. I sighed and leaned back against the couch. I knew it. Edward tilted his head to brush his lips along my neck until he reached my ear, sliding his arm around my abdomen. Please, just one. And then, I swear, I'll never bring it up again. Fine, one, I answered, holding up a single finger to emphasize my point. And if I don't like it, I'm done. Thank you, Edward said with a broad smile, pressing a firm kiss to my lips. Deal. Bella, what a surprise. I heard from across the room the moment I entered it, my stomach positively tied in knots. I turned in the direction of it and saw Emma Bishop making her way toward me, kissing my cheek when she reached my spot. Riley told me that Edward mentioned that you might be coming to join us here. I'm so glad you decided to. Thanks, I promised him I would, but I'm really not very good at these kinds of things, I replied, folding my arms around myself, already feeling nervous. It was the first day at a new school all over again, only worse. Don't worry, you'll be fine, Emma assured me, and guided me further into the room. The moment I was introduced as PFC Cullen's wife, all eyes in the room fell on me, and my heart joined my stomach in the pit of my gut. Emma linked her arm with mine and leaned toward my ear as we made our way across the room. You're something of a celebrity around here. Most of us can't get our husbands to stop for a gallon of milk on the way home at night. So your man? Quite coveted, to put it mildly, and I think they might even be trying to devise a plan to clone him. I laughed uncomfortably when really, I felt like hiding behind one of the couches in the center of the room with the implication of the statement. About 4 months into our marriage, I had a period that was the worst I'd had in years, with pain so bad that I could barely get off the couch, let alone attempt to drive. So, unthinkingly, I'd asked my husband to stop on the way home because I'd run out of tampons and was nearly out of pads as well. And one doesn't have to be married or even dating, for that matter, only know a man to figure out how that conversation went. However, because Edward was the man he was, he walked in the door that night with 2 plastic bags. One carried takeout, so I didn't have to cook, and the other held my box of tampons, pads and a bag of Reese's mini peanut butter cups. I might have felt more than a little guilty at that point for being snappy with him on the phone earlier in the day. And I showed him exactly how much I loved and appreciated him after nature's gift, and I parted company over a week later. I hated ones like that. I hadn't been around the other wives outside the PX, though, and even there, they covertly stared at me, and I found it pretty ridiculous. I had an amazing husband, that much I was aware of, but over tampons, either that, or I wasn't self-conscious enough to begin with, and the powers that be were really trying to mess with me. I sat down on one of the couches next to Emma, and we all settled in to begin with the book discussion at hand, The Scarlet Letter. Bella, I'm sorry you're coming in at the end of one of our readings, but it should be much more interesting for you next time around, one of the older wives, who appeared to be in her 30s, said with a polite smile. Oh, I read this in high school. It's fine, I replied far more confidently than I felt. So, it's still pretty fresh in your memory then, yet another said, though not quite as politely. Emma leaned over to me again, whispering softly, "Don't mind Sylvia, she's like this with everyone." The discussion began, and the differing views on each of the characters and situations really were fascinating to me. I was just beginning to really be glad that I'd come, and then the questions were posed to Sylvia. Personally, I don't think Hester deserved all that, and Dinsdale was pretty much a coward and a jackass through the whole thing until the end of it all. If that were me, I would have taken him right down with me. I didn't make that baby alone, and I also would have gotten that husband of mine off his high horse. Maybe she wouldn't have gone there if he hadn't left her to fend for herself, Sylvia said, her accent from wherever she was originally from becoming stronger and thicker, and sometimes hard to understand. Bella, the woman on the other side of me, whom I'd learned was named Lynn, turned her gaze to me, and I felt like I was back in English class with all the other eyes on me as well. What did you think? I think it was a very different time and circumstances, but I always believed in the message I personally got out of it. Every action has a consequence in life, and it's how we handle and carry ourselves through it, and our actions beyond that define who we are. And taking down Dinsdale with her would have ruined him much sooner, and it wouldn't have lessened her own part in it. And she had a child to think about as well, so it always falls on the woman, right? Sylvia asked, bobbing her head. No, but she was married and made the decision to be with another man. Despite that, I replied and felt my forehead tense slightly. Well, like I said, maybe if her husband had been in Boston with her, doing what he was supposed to be doing, she wouldn't have needed the Reverend's comfort. So, you think she was justified in cheating on her husband because he wasn't there, really? Emma asked from beside me, obviously just as baffled with it all as I was. Thank God, I'm not alone in this one. Whether men want to recognize it or not, women have needs, too, regardless of what time they lived in. And men do it all the time, so what the hell? Sylvia continued and crossed her arms over her chest. Oh, but wait, I forgot, you two are the newbies to this. One of you is still in the throes of the honeymoon phase, and the other has a new baby as well. How wonderful it must be to still be in that blissful cloud of ignorance where everything is perfect and good until your man goes on that first training mission away from home. And if you think he's lying there at night, dreaming of you and just waiting to come home to you, you're more naive than you look. No man is that perfect, even superhero Cullen. Wait till you've been married a few more years, you pop out a couple of kids, so you lose that Barbie doll waist of yours, and you don't feel like putting out every single night anymore. And see how long it takes until those googly eyes of his land on someone else. Emma and I both sat gaping at Sylvia for a moment, and then my gaze wandered around the room and a couple of the women actually averted their eyes from me and Sylvia. Well, I guess it's a good thing I know how to keep my husband's eyes and mind exactly where they belong. He's very satisfied, I replied, feeling my skin crawl with burgeoning anger. Oh sweetie, did he make you think you were the first? Sylvia replied in a condescending tone, and my fists clenched more tightly on either side of my thighs. You weren't, right? Let me guess, you tamed him. It'll never last, not while they're gone for weeks at a time. Sylvia, that's enough, Lynn said, trying to ease the tension in the room, but it was too late. He's already been away from me for months at a time, without me putting out every single night. I'm really not worried about it. My husband loves me, I replied, reaching down for my purse at my feet. I needed to get out of there before I punched that woman. If you really think he didn't indulge in basic, you really are more naive than I thought. He's a man, and a young one, at that. They've got needs, and when you're not around to take care of it, Sylvia trailed off with a shrug. Just trying to open your eyes, honey. I pulled the strap of my purse up over my shoulder and stood, shaking my head and glared back at her. Well, I can see why your man decided to stray, honey. You're a bitch. If you're so damn miserable, why stay married to your husband? Simple. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, Sylvia replied unabashedly, and my eyes widened more, before I turned to walk away, hearing her snicker. Now, remember, dear, what happens in the book club, stays in the book club. I could almost feel the steam leaving my ears as I stormed out, seething under my breath while I dug in my purse for my car keys. The audacity of that woman. Boy, was my darling hubby going to get an earful when I got home. Bella, wait. I turned to find Emma jogging toward me with her long, sandy waves bouncing with the movement. Oh my god, I am so sorry about Sylvia. Why are you sorry? It's not like you told her to be a vile bitch, I snapped, causing her to flinch slightly, and I rubbed my hand over my face. I'm sorry, it's not you. I just can't believe her, and the fact that no one else really had anything to say about it. Like it's an accepted norm or something to cheat on your husband while he's away, or that she knows a damn thing about my marriage or relationship with my husband. I agree. I've never seen anything like that in all the time I've been coming here, and I really can't see myself coming back after this, Emma replied, shaking her head with a shudder. Doesn't appear like she's the only one, and I am not okay with that at all. I could never do that to Riley, and I can't see him ever doing that to me either, or our daughter. Neither could I agreed, folding my arms over my chest with a tense jaw. And I know Edward wanted me to come here and make friends, but I can't do it with women like that. Hey, listen, Emma started as I turned toward my car again and paused to look back at her. I have a small group of friends that come over to my house on Friday afternoons. It's kind of a play date with our kids, but a few are still babies like Sammy, and it's more like a time to just sit around for girl talk. It's very casual and informal, and the most we complain about concerning our husbands are the normal things like toilet lids and beard shavings in the sink. You should come, we'd love to have you. The pleading look on her face was hard to resist, and I knew that not only would it make Edward feel better about me not having any friends, it could also be really good for me, especially since Emma wasn't much older than I was, so I nodded with a smile. Sure, that sounds great. Awesome. We meet there around 3 after a few of the kids get out of school, and we usually just sit around and chat for a couple hours before everyone heads home to make dinner. Really? We're not all like that, and there's very few of us that actually are. See you tomorrow, then? She replied, still somewhat uncertain, but I relaxed even more and nodded again before getting into my car. My nerves were still a bit on edge all the way home, and I was relieved to find Edward's car already in the parking lot when I arrived. I quickly made my way up the stairs to our apartment and dropped my purse to the floor just inside, spotting Edward reading on the couch. "Hey, baby, you're home early. How'd it go?" he asked, closing his book and setting it on the coffee table. "Please come here," I said, rooted to my spot, and watched as he stood to walk over to me with a worried brow. I slid my arms around his shoulders and hugged him tightly, inhaling his scent through my nose while he returned my embrace. We remained there in silence for several moments, holding each other, and I soaked in the feeling of his body against me. "I love you so much." "I love you too, Bella." "What's all this about?" Edward inquired, kissing my neck and lifting his head to look at me. I relayed to him what happened in group that day, and felt myself beginning to tremble again, with the renewed anger coursing through me, especially with Sylvia's parting statement to me. "Is this an accepted norm? That somehow, cheating on your spouse is actually okay? I mean, why stay married or even get married in the first place if you're so unhappy with someone that you're just going to cheat and keep cheating? I don't understand that." Edward kissed my forehead and wrapped his arms around me again, and tears of frustration began falling from my eyes and onto his t-shirt as I pressed my face to his chest. "I don't know, baby. I'm sorry. I didn't think that things would be like that for you there. I'm so done with that." But I did get a chance to talk to Emma, and she invited me over tomorrow to hang out with some of her other friends. I told her I'd come, but I'll still be home in time to make dinner, I assured, actually feeling more excited about going the following day as I told him about it, much to my own surprise. "Bella, go and have fun. Even if I had to take care of myself for one night, it really wouldn't be that big of a deal. Don't worry about anything else, okay?" he replied, brushing my lips with his. "Okay, and Edward?" I started, tugging at the front of his t-shirt with my fingers and looking him straight in the eyes. "I really do love you, and not that I believe that you ever would, but you ever cheat on me, you won't have to worry about me getting back at you. I'll just chop your balls off." Edward growled playfully and then laughed, lifting me into his arms and kissing me as I wrapped my legs around his hips. "I wouldn't expect anything less from my little firecracker, but you never have to worry about that at all. I've got everything I need right here, and I kinda like my balls right where they are." I lightly pinched the back of his neck, but his returned laugh eased me completely, and I took his face between my hands and pressed a firm kiss to his lips. "Okay, now that we're clear on that, put me down so I can go feed my amazing husband." Millimeter. "Nope," Edward replied with a forced serious expression, holding me tighter. "I think I like you right where you are right now, too. You don't eat, you don't get to play later," I teased, shaking my head at him. "Yes ma'am," Edward groaned with a chuckle, setting me down on my feet and patting my ass as I moved past him to head for the kitchen. The exaggerated sway of my hips made him follow right behind me. That made me smile. My man still had it bad for me. "Take that, Sylvia." I paced the bedroom floor, biting at my thumbnail and trying to explain my current predicament away with any other ailment than the obvious. I wasn't sick. Maybe stress? No, that didn't make sense either. Everything had been damn close to perfect lately. Edward had just been promoted to corporal and he was so excited, and I was very proud of him. I hadn't changed any of my routines or physical activity. Hell, I even tried to mentally calculate the cycles of the few friends I'd made on post since I began going to Emma's. Disturbing, perhaps, but it's a well-known fact that women who spend a lot of time together tend to menstruate at the same time. However, even that was ruled out, and I felt the tears return to my eyes. "No, please God, no, not now, I beg you," I mentally pleaded as I crumpled to the floor in sobs and leaned against the side of the bed when I'd eventually run out of possibilities. We weren't ready for it. We had done everything to prevent it for the time being, aside from the obvious of abstaining. I folded my hands behind my neck and rested my forehead against my knees. I did still want kids with Edward someday. We'd even joked about making my dad a grandfather shortly after we got married, but we'd already talked at length about it just months earlier, not before Edward completed his enlistment, and definitely not when I was just barely 19 myself. I hadn't even thought about starting college yet, or gotten a job or anything. Aside from all that, and the thought of it alone sounded very selfish to me, it was still my time with Edward. We'd barely celebrated our first wedding anniversary, and he still had nearly a year of active duty left. We both wanted to wait until he was at least beyond that, and maybe even a year past it, with just the two of us, before we even began to discuss having a baby. A pregnancy is going to change everything. I thought with another deep sob, clutching my hair in my fists, and then sat up. I had to make sure before I completely succumbed to despair, even though the idea of walking into our bathroom with that long rectangular box made me feel as if I could throw up what little I'd managed to eat for breakfast. I'd heard a million times in my life that those particular 3 minutes were the longest imaginable in a woman's life, regardless of the result desired, but I would never know. Less than a minute into it, I saw that hint of a second line begin to appear, growing darker as my eyes remained locked on it, willing it to disappear. I glanced up to my reflection in the mirror, finding my skin blanched, and yet more tears welling as my lips trembled. How did this happen? Speaking to no one but myself, I shook my head and began racking my brain. I hadn't missed a single pill, and I always double-checked to make sure before Edward and I got into bed at night. And Edward, how was I going to tell my husband that despite our careful planning, we were going to become parents far sooner than we were prepared for? I started making dinner for him early, both to make sure it was done by the time he got home and to give me something to occupy my mind with. Besides, it would be much easier to talk to him once he'd eaten and relaxed some from the day. I had just finished setting the lemon chicken he loved so much on the table when he trudged heavily through the front door, dropping his gear at his feet. I forced a smile onto my lips before turning to face him, noticing his creased brow and the near whimper that escaped him. "Edward, what's wrong? Please tell me that I haven't forgotten something important like a birthday or anniversary or something," he asked with a wince, but his body language was screaming with exhaustion, "because then I'll really feel like shit." I couldn't help the genuine chuckle I gave in response and made my way over to him, wrapping my arms around his shoulders and greeting him with a kiss. "My birthday was last week and our anniversary was last month. You're safe." "Oh, thank God. This training has all my days running together, baby." "I'm sorry," he mumbled into my neck, hugging me around the waist. "Everything looks great, but would you mind if I took a rain check? I'm so tired and sore. I honestly think I counted at least 10 different muscles that I didn't know I had just today." My shoulders slumped slightly, and I was fighting to keep myself together all over again. "Edward, I was really hoping that we could talk tonight. Baby, can it wait till morning? I'm really exhausted and I would hate to fall asleep halfway through on you. I promise you'll have my full and undivided attention in the morning before I go," he said softly, brushing my lips gently with his and then walking around me, taking off his jacket and tossing it onto the chair. "Actually, it can't. It's important," I try to say calmly, folding my arms tightly in front of me. "All the more reason I should be more rested." "I'm sorry, baby, I just really can't keep my eyes open much longer," he continued as he walked down the hall leading toward our bedroom. "Edward," I cried out desperately in almost a bellow, and I felt the first warm, wet trail slip down my cheek. "I'm pregnant." Edward's footsteps halted just outside our bedroom door, and his body froze, remaining stock still for a few agonizing moments before turning his head to look back at me. "What?" His face went just as pale as mine had earlier that afternoon, and I began cursing myself for blurting it out like that. That wasn't how I'd planned to tell him, although I really hadn't had much of a plan at all. But at that moment, he was scaring me a little. I was late, so I took a test. I didn't want to bother you with it until I was sure, but it was positive. "Edward." He leaned his back against the wall and ran his hand over his hair and down his neck, his face blank and expressionless. His silence was deafening as he stared at the opposite wall, not even seeming to breathe. "How?" My lips made a firm line, and I shook my head as my vision blurred more. "I don't know." Edward inhaled deeply and nodded, pushing off the wall. "Actually, I think I'm going to take a shower real quick." I didn't even have time to reply to that before he crossed the hall and closed the bathroom door behind him. My hand clutched at my chest where the welling ache inside me strained against the walls of it as the other braced me against the wall. I didn't know what to think or feel at that moment. I could only tell myself that everything would be okay. He just needed some time to absorb it all, and then we could talk about it, and life would get back to normal. Except that there would never be the normal we'd known together ever again, I thought as I began clearing the table and putting the food away. I wasn't hungry anymore, and apparently, neither was my husband. Our entire life was about to change, and there was no slowing it down or stopping it. In a few months, we would be parents responsible for a whole new life that we'd created together, ready or not. We would figure it out. We had to. But I was having trouble convincing myself of that. Whenever I'd felt lost in the past, it was Edward that had been the calming voice of reason in my ear, always knowing exactly what to say or do. Who would hold me and tell me that everything was going to be okay? And he was in the shower, probably freaking out as much as I was. I made my way to the bedroom, listening to the beating spray across the hall continue, and changing into my short sleep set. I stood in front of the mirror over my dresser, splaying my hands across my stomach and gazing at the reflection. We'd made a baby. A tiny little part of both of us combined was inside me right at that moment. For the first time that day, the thought didn't scare me very much at all. I was carrying Edward's baby. We hadn't planned on a child so soon, but I couldn't see it as a mistake. The only thought that scared me right then was that he did. I'd never seen him look like that before, as he did when I told him I was pregnant, so blank, vacant and unreadable. I knew he'd be shocked, but I expected something. I stepped back from the dresser and crossed the hall to the bathroom, opening the door and stepping inside. I watched the silhouette of his body through the curtain, and he was barely moving, except for the repeated motion of rolling his neck. I sat down on the toilet, bending my leg to my chest and holding it there. "Can we please talk?" His head stilled and I heard him draw in a breath, his palms still pressed against the shower wall, and his chin lowered to his chest. "What do you want me to say, Bella?" "Anything. That you're happy, upset, pissed off, something," I replied, my voice straining with emotion. "That we're okay?" "I'm not pissed off, baby," Edward answered, and we both sighed at once, me in relief and him in what seemed like exasperation. "And we're fine, I just shit." "I don't know, Bella. This wasn't something we planned on right now, and I really don't know what to think. You were on the pill. Did you miss one or something?" "What, do you think I did this on purpose?" "I'm just as freaked out about this as you are," I asked, my defenses immediately going up in a way they never had with him. "No, I don't think you did it on purpose," Edward answered with a sigh and turned off the water, and I felt my body relax a little again. His hand reached out to grab the towel from the rack, and then slid the vinyl curtain across to reveal him to me again, with the thick terry cloth wrapped around his waist already. He began drying his face with another, and I hated being unable to see his eyes more so than ever before. "We're not ready for this, Bella." My eyes rolled back to force away more tears, and I tightened my arms around my leg. "We need to be. We're having a baby. This is our baby, and I really want this." The towel dropped from his face, and he finally looked to me again. "I know, Bella. I just need some time to wrap my head around it, okay?" I pressed my lips together and nodded, rising from the toilet and making my way to leave the room. I felt his hand take mine, and I turned my head to look at him. "We will figure this out, baby," he said in a soft voice, and gave me a gentle squeeze. "I know," I whispered in reply and opened the bathroom door, releasing my hand from his, and stepping out to cross the hall to our bedroom. I could barely sleep that night, and Edward was restless as well, tossing and turning in the bed much more than usual. He was still somewhat tense the next morning when he kissed me goodbye on his way out the door, and I couldn't bring myself to move far from the couch all day. I hadn't expected him to suddenly switch gears and be ecstatically happy about the pregnancy, but I'd hoped he would at least hold me the night before, and let me kind of feel that we were in it together. He'd closed off from me more than he ever had, and that hurt so much, I could barely breathe. Becoming pregnant hadn't been in either of our plans, but as I sat there watching my hand run over my flat abdomen, I couldn't bring myself to regret it either. It was like Esme had said to Rosalie back in March, "It will happen when the time is right." I believed with all my heart that our baby was meant to come along just then, despite the precautions we'd taken and the plans we'd made to wait. I finally got myself to rise around 4 to begin heating up dinner from the night before, and making a fresh salad to go along with it. When Edward came home an hour later, I began to fear that he would bypass our meal again and head straight for bed. He looked even more drawn and exhausted than he did the previous evening, but instead he stood at the doorway of the kitchen and leaned against it, gazing at me silently. I set the salad bowl on the table and crossed the room to him, wrapping my arms around his waist, and felt relief when he returned my embrace. His hold tightened on me as he kissed my hair, and I pressed my lips to his chest. "I love you." "I love you too," he mumbled quietly, and then rubbed his hands along my back. "Bella, we need to talk." I froze, lifting my head to look at him to find his eyes firmly set as he gazed down at me. "What? Please don't tell me that you want me to get rid of our baby." "No, nothing like that. I could never do that, nor would I ever put you through it," Edward replied and took my face between his hands, kissing my forehead and then my lips. "I've been doing a lot of thinking today, trying to figure out what we're going to do to handle this, and I want to re-enlist, and I need you to be okay with that." Epov. I knew what was coming before the words even left my lips, so when she stepped back from me with tears in her eyes and shook her head, I wasn't the least bit surprised. "No, no," she exclaimed and turned away from me, walking back over to the table to begin serving dinner. "Bella." "No, Edward," Bella yelled even louder, dropping the utensils in her hands to the table harshly and spinning to face me again, with her finger pointed to my chest. "You promised me. You promised that once your contract was up, you were done and then it was our time. No more army, and we could go home. And now, because I'm pregnant, that changes. You said yourself that you couldn't be the father you wanted to be while you were still in the army. You didn't want to drag our kids, or me, all over the world because of your job choice. Those were your words. How can you ask me to be okay with that?" "Bella, I don't see what other option I have," I replied, making my way toward her, and she took 2 steps back. "What about the option of keeping your promise to me?" Bella snapped with tears trailing down her cheeks. "I've supported you through all of this. I've stood by you, I've married you, I've left my family behind across the country for you, because I want to be with you, yes, but damn it, I want a life with you too. Do you remember that part? The house, the kids, the dog back home, where our parents can see their grandchild and we can be regular couple, not just another soldier and his little army wife." She was hurt, I could see that, and even understood it. Watching her cry like that was tearing me apart, but my head had to look at the bigger picture. "And how are we going to have those things? It's not just about you and me anymore, Bella. And I need to take care of my family," I replied, and she sunk down shakily into one of the kitchen chairs. "I didn't come to this choice lightly. I've thought of every word I've ever said to you, every promise I've ever made. This pregnancy changes everything. I'm sorry, but that's the long and short of it. If it was just you and me still, I'd know we'd be okay if I left the army and went back to school. Or couldn't get a job right away. We know how to make it through as a couple. You can't cut corners as easily with a family, and as much as we didn't want this right now, there isn't a better solution to the situation we're in at the moment. I have a job I love that isn't going to disappear tomorrow, unless I really fuck up. In the army, as a soldier, I would be able to provide my family with everything they need. It doesn't get any better than that. I can't give any better than that." "Yes, it does. It's called having you. That's what we need. My husband and our baby's father," Bella sobbed, pointing to her chest and then resting her hand on her abdomen. "Have you taken that into consideration with your not-so-light decision? That we need you?" I took a deep breath and walked over to her, crouching down at her knees. "Of course, I did. And I'm still going to be here, but my top priority needs to be taking care of and providing for this family, not letting it struggle. There's more than one way to take care of your family, Edward, and you're not doing so well in one of the most important parts right now," Bella cried, rising from her seat quickly and stepping around me, running for our bedroom and shutting the door. I remained there on the floor with my elbows supported on my knees, running my hands over my nose and mouth. I swore when I married her that I would never hurt her, never be the cause of tears like that, but there was no way around it. Bella was pregnant. From the moment she told me that the night before, my mind had not stopped spinning, and nightmares haunted my sleep, of not being able to support my wife and child. Our perfect, blissful existence together had been turned up on its end with that one statement from Bella. "Edward, I'm pregnant." When I made my way to bed that night after cleaning up another untouched meal, I couldn't ignore the turning of my stomach. She had not come back out at all after storming into our room, and I found her already asleep with her back to my side of the bed. I sighed and began to undress, climbing in beside her and kissing her hair. I wasn't sure if she would ever forgive me, but I hoped we could at least get past it eventually. I loved my wife and didn't blame her at all for the curveball that had been thrown into our plans. She didn't make the baby alone, but it really had changed so much in our lives. I wanted to be a good husband and father, and re-enlisting was the one way I knew I could do it. I'd always known that I wanted to be a soldier, even if my career plans had changed slightly when I began dating Bella. What I hadn't known was just how much I would love it, and how damn good I would be at it. I looked forward to going into work every morning, and felt a sense of fulfillment every evening when I came home. I couldn't be as certain that I would be happy in some menial job, working myself to the bone to barely make ends meet and support my family. The army was physically demanding, but it was worth it at the end of the day. And if I was unhappy with any other job, how would that affect my wife and kid? I never wanted to make my family miserable or force them to struggle to survive, and I hated that thought more than the idea of moving them around every 2 or 3 years. Nothing had improved the following morning. I'd woken to find Bella's side of the bed already vacant and cold, and after my shower, I walked out to the kitchen. My breakfast and coffee were sitting on the table while Bella stood by the sink washing dishes, barely acknowledging my presence when I entered the room. I couldn't finish my coffee and regretted starting to drink it in the morning when we moved into the new apartment. It just made me more jittery than usual that morning. Even when I'd finished my eggs and toast and brought the plate over to her, she simply took it from me and dropped it into the soapy water. I made to kiss her goodbye, and she offered me her cheek, and that was something she had never done in the entire year of our marriage, except in jest. There was nothing joking in her eyes, and she nodded as I told her that I'd see her after work. No bye or have a good day, and most tellingly, no I love you in response to my own. I returned home that evening, anxious to talk to her and beg her forgiveness if I needed to, but arrived to an empty, silent apartment, and a note stuck to the fridge. Edward, gone to Emma's, might be later than usual. Dinner is in the refrigerator, microwave it for 3 minutes. Bella, shit, that's right, it's Friday, I mumbled to myself and dropped the sheet of paper onto the counter. I was only able to eat a little more than half of my dinner, hating the quiet and the absence of my wife across the table from me. Even the silent treatment she was giving me would have been preferable to nothing at all, despite how insane it was driving me. I'd always felt confident in the ability to communicate that Bella and I shared, and our worst arguments in the past had never lasted that long, and we never went more than 24 hours without saying I love you. Bella didn't come home that night until almost 9, and we barely made eye contact before she passed by me on the couch to head for the kitchen. You eat? Well, that's something, I thought and rose to follow her. Yeah, Bella, can we talk? Her back stiffened and she shook her head, after apparently noting that I'd already done my own dishes that night. I'm tired and going to bed. Riley and Emma are coming over in the morning. Good night. Bella, please. No, I'm not ready yet, Bella replied sharply, and once again, made her way to the bedroom and shut the door. If I'd had more hair, I would have been tugging it out by the roots. I had destroyed my nearly perfect marriage with one simple choice. If I followed through on it, would she leave me? God, I couldn't bear that. Bella was like air for me. I couldn't breathe without her. She was my everything. I couldn't lose her. And would she take the baby and go home to Washington, where I would be nothing more than a part-time parent, whenever my career would allow me to be close enough to be even that? Even if she didn't return home and stayed nearby, I could only be a weekend dad, and that wasn't something I wished on my child, either. I was so tired, but I couldn't sleep that night, remaining on the couch and flipping through endless infomercials and old television reruns until my eyes grew heavy enough, and I passed out with the remote still in my lap. I felt the object leave my hand and a blanket covering me just before dawn. But by the time I opened my eyes, Bella was already walking away, and I heard the bathroom door click closed, followed by the start of the shower. I didn't go back to sleep, however, and sat up to wait for her to come out. As with the previous morning, she barely acknowledged me and went about making breakfast and coffee, and then lemonade and snacks for our impending visit from Riley, Emma, and Sammy. When I sat down to eat, Bella left the room to fold the quilt again and tidy up the living room. The first smile I'd seen from her in days came when our visitors arrived, and she excitably made her way to the kitchen with Emma and the baby. I felt Riley's hand on my shoulder, and I looked away from her to glance at him, and he shook his head. You may need a trip to the lumber store soon to build yourself a doghouse, Riley said with a sigh, and I rubbed a hand over my face. Tell me something I don't know, I replied, returning my eyes to Bella, where she sat in the kitchen and lifted Sammy out of her car seat. Maybe a beer instead? Riley pressed, his grip tightening on me. It's 10 in the morning. I grumbled, rolling my eyes. Come on, I didn't get to buy you one for your 21st, and you look like you could really use it right now, he replied insistently, tugging at my elbow to pull me toward the door. Fine, baby, I'm going out with Riley for a bit. We won't be long, I called out to her, and she merely nodded, her eyes remaining on the baby in her lap. 20 minutes later, we were sitting at the nearly empty bar, with only a few regulars around us, but I could only stare down at my beer for several minutes. She wants you to talk me out of it, doesn't she? I started, raising my glass to take a sip. She didn't say that in so many words. Anything in uniform doesn't appear to be on Bella's list of things she wants to see, but I think she might be silently hoping for it, Riley answered with a nod. She's really upset about this. I know. I can actually count the number of words she's said to me in the last 2 days. And it's killing me. I choked on my words, leaning back against the booth bench. But you're not going to change your mind, are you? Riley continued, taking a deep breath. I was still for a moment, but then shook my head. No, I'm not. I mean, I'm not going to go off and re-enlist behind her back or anything. But I tried explaining it to her, that I need to be able to take care of them. I don't want it to cost me my marriage, but I also can't live with the uncertainty of how I'm going to manage that. I want them to have the best I can possibly provide, and this is it. That's my job as a husband and father. It wasn't my intent to put my kids through the army life, but it would be so much worse to watch them go without if I couldn't afford their basic needs, and that goes for Bella as well. They'll always have a roof over their heads, food on the table, medical insurance, everything. I can't guarantee that with any other profession, and if Bella wanted to go back to school at any point, how would she do that with a baby and a job just enough to make ends meet? But is it what you want, Edward? Riley asked, leaning forward on the table. I drew in a deep breath as I thought about his question, and then nodded. Yes, it really is. I hadn't thought about it much before this, because it's true, I did promise her. Once my contract was met, I was going to leave the army behind, but with the baby coming so soon, it's made me think about the future even more. I don't want to leave. Even now, I can come home from work every day and look at my wife, and know that she wants for nothing that she needs. That is more fulfilling than even the job I love. Okay, you remember when Emma told me she was pregnant? He began and I nodded. You know how freaked out I was. And Emma was too. She didn't like the idea of having a baby while I was in the army any more than Bella seems to. Aside from the obvious of never having just one place to call home and the stability that would provide, she was terrified that something would happen to me, and she'd not only lose me, but our daughter would grow up never knowing her father. Or that I could be gone for weeks or months at a time someday, and she'd sit home with our little girl, afraid that I was never coming home to them. Bella loves you like nothing I've ever seen before, even with my own wife. And there's no doubt in my mind that Emma loves me more than anything in this world, save for our daughter. But Bella's scared. Your dad served in the Gulf if I remember correctly, didn't he? My elbows rested on the table, and I held my head between my hands. She had heard the story of that from my mother, and how for so long she feared he was dead and would never come back to her and their boys. The world was an unpredictable place, and she knew that someday, that could be her. Glued to the television, praying for any news that would tell her I wasn't dead, while our child saluted that flag every day, and asked God to bring Daddy home safe. Shit. I don't know how to fix this, I said with a sigh, my hands falling to the table. Stop trying to, Riley emphasized, and my gaze met his. Emma wasn't happy at all with my career choice, but she also knew that she couldn't ask me to be anyone less than the man I was, because then I wouldn't be the one she fell in love with. You can't expect Bella to be anyone other than the woman you fell in love with either. She's hurt and upset, but she doesn't want to lose you, let alone leave you. I went through the silent treatment too, and I'll admit, it was hell. But she'll talk when she's ready, and maybe it will take some time before everything gets back to the way it was, but I have no doubt that it will, if not better, and stronger because of what you've been through. You mean way too much to each other for something like this to come between you. Otherwise, Emma wouldn't have had to take Bella's keys away from her last night until she felt she was safe to drive home, with the way she was crying. I felt my chest constrict so tight, I could barely breathe with the image Riley had just painted in my mind. She'd been so exhausted the night before, and it was largely in part to the tears she'd shed. More tears. Fuck. I'm not telling you this to make you feel like shit, Edward, you know that. But just give her some time, man. It's all you can really do right now. Could I give her more time? I would, since I had little choice. The problem was, I wasn't sure how much more my heart could take. I tried heeding to Riley's suggestion, I really did. However, when Saturday and Sunday passed in prolonged silence, I felt sure that I was literally going to lose my mind. We hadn't talked or touched or even remained in the same room for more than a few minutes in 3 days. I'd made it to bed the night before, and even though she was still awake, she quickly turned off her lamp and laid down, again with her back to me. By Sunday night, I was completely falling apart. I laid there in the dark, staring up at the ceiling, and I could tell by the way she was breathing, that Bella wasn't asleep, either. Tears burned in my eyes that I was fighting to hold back, but damn, I missed her. And she was right there beside me, close enough to touch, but still so far away from me at the same time. Are you ever going to speak to me again? I asked in a strained voice, my throat tight with emotion. The room was silent for several more moments, and I turned my head on the pillow to look at her. Her hand rose to dab at her eye with the edge of her thumb, and she sniffled, breathing out shakily before answering. Yes, just not now. Bella, it's been 3 days. I know how long it's been, Edward, Bella replied tensely, throwing the covers aside and sitting up on the edge of the bed. For a moment, I thought she was going to walk away, but she didn't move any more than to bring her hand to her abdomen. Are you okay? I asked worriedly, rising up behind her. Do you care? She retorted softly, but choked on the last word and looked down. My eyes widened and I was struck speechless by her statement. What kind of question is that? Do you think I would be this freaked out over you not speaking to me if I didn't care? About our baby, Edward. About the fact that I am carrying our child, Bella replied, flipping the switch on her lamp and standing up to face me. Okay, fine. You want to talk, let's talk. What is it that you want to say? I don't want to fight with you, Bella. I know you're mad at me for wanting to re-enlist, but you know what, Edward? You want to re-enlist? That's fine, re-enlist. You really think that's all I'm upset about? That it's really that simple? She asked with tears flowing down her cheeks and her lips trembling as she spoke. I know you don't want me to, I replied, shaking my head. No, I don't, I really don't. But I didn't want you to enlist in the first place, and obviously, I got over that, Bella cried out, holding up her left hand where her wedding band and engagement ring were settled. You being enlisted now scares the shit out me, but I've adjusted to that. I've spelled it out for you, Edward, and you still don't get it. Okay, then if it's not the re-enlistment, then what is it? I asked, completely dumbfounded. It's you, Edward, Bella sobbed, her shoulders shaking. I wasn't any more prepared for this than you were, and I was terrified to tell you, but this is our baby, and you're not seeing it that way. You can't seem to see past the situation or the pregnancy, or something you need to solve or take care of, and realize that we made a child together. You don't have to be ecstatic about this, but I need you to feel something. I needed you so badly that night to hold me and not just tell me, but show me that everything was going to be okay, and you pushed me away. You went into your own head and walked away from me, and yeah, I was angry when you told me you wanted to re-enlist. It hurt because you promised me, but as much as I've been counting down the days, I've always had this nagging gut feeling that either you would break your promise or at least fight the urge to. I just kept hoping it was wrong. Even though I knew how much you loved being in the army and wouldn't want to leave, I really wanted to be wrong. As she spoke, I'd moved to sit in front of her at the edge of the bed, folding my hands and watching her intently. So much pain in those eyes that I had caused tears shed because of me, and I didn't know what to do. It hurt so much to see her that way. Would she let me touch her, hold her, anything? Bella, I'm sorry. I know I reacted badly. When you said you were pregnant, that definitely wasn't even on the top 20 list of urgent matters I thought you would need to talk to me about. Never even crossed my mind, and I really didn't know how to react. And of course I realized that we made a child together, but baby, I need to know that I can take care of you. That has always been my top priority since the day we got married. And maybe I could have felt confident that I could do it outside the army before, but this situation changes a whole lot. A soft gasp sounded from her, and she stepped further back from me, raising her eyebrow, and my hands covered my face. I really had just referred to my child as a situation. She was right. In all my planning and figuring, I'd never really absorbed the reality of my child as an actual person. I'd gotten my wife pregnant, I fathered a child, I had a family to support. Everything was so clinical and technical. Not that I was staring at the stomach right then that carried my baby. Not that my Bella was so scared and needed me to hold her the other night to make her feel loved and safe. Not that I was going to watch my beautiful wife bring our brand new baby into the world in a few months' time. Not that I was going to have a little boy or girl someday, looking up at me and calling me daddy. I hadn't allowed myself to feel it, only solve it, and it literally brought me to my knees before her. I was going to be a dad. Shit, I've been worrying about the wrong things, and I left you to deal with the rest alone. Oh God, I'm sorry, Bella, I said, my breath short and trembling. I watched her feet as she stepped closer and finally felt the touch of her hand on my hair, and I turned my face up to look at her. Not all the wrong things, Bella replied, shaking her head and brushing her thumb across my cheek where a single tear had fallen. You were thinking like a provider, which you've never failed me on. But I need my husband and the father of my child more than any of that right now. Rising to my knees, I pressed my lips to her abdomen where her top didn't quite cover, still unable to believe that our child lay nestled in there somewhere. I stood slowly and slid my arms around her waist to hold her, and I wouldn't have blamed her at all if she hadn't welcomed it. Though I was relieved when she did, eagerly. Bella's arms wrapped around my shoulders, and she even lifted onto her toes to secure her hold on me more firmly. I continued to mumble apologies into her neck, holding her as tightly as I could without hurting her or the baby. Our baby. Oh God, we're having a baby, I whispered softly, lifting my head and taking her face between my hands and kissing her. You're having my baby. Please don't be mad. I didn't mean for this to happen, she replied with more tears streaming down her face, her body shuddering with a cry. Oh, baby, I sighed, brushing my lips on her forehead and guiding her over to our bed, lying down with her and wrapping her in my arms. What I should have done 3 nights before. No, 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 I am not mad, least of all at you. But you didn't want this, you never did, even before we got together, and now I'm forcing you into fatherhood, she sobbed against my chest, clinging her arm around my waist. I'm sorry. Don't apologize like you're the only one made this baby, I replied, and she lifted her tear-filled eyes to meet mine. Not everything in life can be perfectly planned exactly the way we want it. If I've learned nothing else from this, it's that. But it doesn't mean that I don't want this baby. You've always said that everything happens for a reason, right? Bella pressed her lips together and nodded, another tear slipping from her eye, and I gently kissed the trail it left over the bridge of her nose. But a baby? Now. I rolled onto my side to face her, slipping my hand between us, and running the backs of my fingers over her abdomen. It really doesn't matter when or how it happened, Bella. I would always want this baby with you. This is our baby, you and me. And I would love this little person no matter when he or she decided to come along. A soft smile came to her lips and she pulled me closer, and I cocooned her in my arms. Will you still feel that way when we have to tell my dad that he's going to be a grandfather so soon after having 2 more babies of his own? I sucked in a slow breath and hummed in contemplation. It was true. Charlie was not exactly going to be thrilled with the prospect of his daughter becoming pregnant. Not so much because it was so soon after the birth of his own sons, but I had repeatedly assured him that children were not in our plans for at least another couple of years. Well, all the more reason to enjoy every moment of this one, right? We might not have any more after this, once he gets his hands on me. It won't be that bad, Bella replied with a chuckle, and it was a relief to hear that sound again, even as she gently swatted my back. Yes, baby, I'm still going to feel this way, I said, kissing her hair, and we lay silently in each other's arms for several moments, until she looked up at me again nervously. What? Fresh tears rimmed her eyes as they flickered between mine, dragging her teeth over her lip and taking a deep breath. You really want to re-enlist, don't you? I sighed, lowering my gaze from hers for a second before looking back to her. Yes, Bella, I do. I understand how you feel, but I need to know that I can take care of you and our baby, that you both have everything I can possibly give you. I understand that too, she murmured softly with a nod, hugging me tightly against her. I can't tell you that I will exactly be doing cartwheels over it anytime soon, but I also don't want to take the chance of falling apart, because either of us unhappy, however slim that would be. I'm not as miserable in this life as I was afraid I would be, and to be honest, I think I was as much meant to be an army wife as you were a soldier. Even though it scares me and I wanted to go home, I've had trouble imagining our lives any other way after all this. The only thing that really scares me is the thought of losing you. I've spent my whole life for as long as I can remember, so afraid that my dad wasn't going to come home from work some night. I've told you that, and I feel so lucky that I haven't lost him. But if I lost you, she paused, her voice strained with emotion and her fingers clinging to my back. I really don't know what I'd do. And now, with the baby coming, I know, baby, I know, I whispered against her forehead, running my fingers through her hair as she pulled herself closer to me. But I will always come home to you and our baby, I promise. I felt her wince slightly in my arms and lowered her head to press to my chest, her hands balled at my back. Those words are never going to mean the same thing between us again, are they? I sighed, my eyes rising to the wall above our heads. Someday, they will, she replied, her fingers unclenching and gliding along my skin again. I know you never intended to break it when you made it, and that nothing can change the fact that it was. But I don't love you any less for being the man you are. I'll just need some time for that part to stop hurting a bit. It will, though, I have no doubt about that. And we'll be fine, even after you re-enlist. I brought my gaze back down to meet hers and watched her take another slow breath. Yeah, you say that not everything is about you, but it's not all about me either. Marriage is about compromising, right? And we're a family, she said softly and brushed her lips on mine. I've supported you through all this, but you've done just as much for me. Your wants and needs are just as important to me as mine are to you. And our family's needs are just as important to both of us. And if staying in the army is what will keep our entire family happy, you included, then that's what will make me the happiest. This isn't a bad life, by any means, just a little scary. Thank you, Bella, I replied in a strained, emotional tone, pressing my lips to hers firmly. I wouldn't go through with it if you'd said no, no matter how much I wanted it. You're so much more important to me than that. You know that, don't you? I do, but I won't, she answered, shaking her head and snuggling against me. As long as I have you and our baby, that's all I need to be truly happy. So when do you think it happened? If you had to guess, I asked after a moment, genuinely curious. Bella's hand stilled on my back, and for a second, I thought I had gone too far too soon. Then she laughed softly and looked up at me. I'll probably have a better idea once I go to the doctor on Thursday, but best guess. Our anniversary, when you beat your record. They do say that the female orgasm increases the chance of conception. That's an old wives' tale. Probably devised by some sneaky women trying to get more pleasure out of sex while trying to get pregnant. I doubt you'll find that in any medical journal in existence, I replied with a raised eyebrow. Maybe my swimmers were just that strong. Medicine isn't an exact science, baby. This little one is proof of that, Bella said with a smile, lovingly stroking her abdomen with her hand. And it took more than your swimmers to create this baby, you know. Okay, I'll deflate my head a bit, I murmured with a chuckle, but then took a shuddering breath, kissing her gently and pulling her back into my arms. God, I really thought I was going to lose you. Her hold tightened on me, and she slid her leg between mine to close any remaining space between us. I'm not going anywhere, Edward, neither of us are. I thought I'd learned to never take for granted the feeling of holding her, but I had, until I couldn't for 3 very long nights, and I never wanted to miss her ever again as I had in that time. I soaked in every moment of her body in my arms that I could, before we both finally gave in to the exhaustion the past few days, and that evening had wrought upon us. We were going to be just fine. Bella and I sat side by side on the couch one night in early November, and I held one of her hands in mine, while she stared at her phone in the other. After her initial appointment with the doctor, it was confirmed that she had most likely conceived right around the night of our anniversary, and it seemed that the pill she was switched to after that horrendous period she'd had the previous year, was not as effective with her body as the one before. So, she was quickly approaching her second trimester, and even though it was barely noticeable that she was pregnant at all yet, she knew we wouldn't be able to hold off much longer before we told our families. We'd be heading back to Forks in just over a month for Christmas, and while my parents would most likely not be terribly upset about becoming grandparents so soon, she was sure her father would need more time to get adjusted to the idea. She didn't want to tell him too close to Thanksgiving, but needed to give him more than a few weeks before she was face to face with him as well. Come on, baby, we have to tell them sometime, I said, stroking the back of her hand with my thumb. Or I could just wear baggy shirts and pants while we're there. No one would ever know until we were safely across the country again, Bella replied, looking over at me, and I could see that she was only half kidding. I lifted my eyebrow at her and she sighed, turning her gaze back to her phone. Okay. But I hope you're ready to handle a hormonal, sobbing wife after he's done yelling at me. I leaned toward her to kiss her temple and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. I'll be right here, baby. We're in this together, right? Bella took a deep breath and nodded, hitting the speed dial for her father and bringing the phone to her ear. Hi Sue, is my dad around? Okay, great. I watched her face as she closed her eyes and mouthed a silent damn it, and I released my hold on her hand to wrap my arm around her shoulders. Hi Dad. Nothing much, she began, and my fingers ran along her arm, and she brought her hand to her hair. Listen, Dad, are you sitting down? Edward and I have something to tell you. No, nothing like that, we're fine. Everything's good. It's just Bella paused, swallowing hard and visibly bracing herself. Daddy, Edward and I are having a baby. A loud crackling could be heard through the phone a moment later, and Bella pulled it away from her ear in response. Her eyes rose to look at the ceiling, as she brought it back with tears rimming her lids. Dad, are you there? She spoke softly into the phone before pulling away, seeing the call still connected. Dad, please say something. I listened as I heard her begin to talk to Sue, and then let out a sob, curling forward to rest her forehead on her knees. She held her phone out to me and I took it from her. Hello? Edward, what's going on? Charlie just left and Bella's crying. What's wrong? Sue asked in a worried tone. I rubbed Bella's back with my free hand as she continued to cry and took a slow breath of my own. Bella is pregnant. Sue gasped softly and was silent for several seconds before she could reply. Are you sure? Yes, she's just about 3 months along, I replied, and Bella's head moved from her knees to my lap. She wanted to wait until she was closer to the end of her first trimester before we said anything. Make sure everything was okay. It is, right? She and the baby are okay? Sue asked and I heard a door slam in the background. Let me talk to her, Charlie's voice sounded, and Sue tried to calm him. Is it him? Sue, is that him? Charlie, please just relax, I heard her say before I heard the phone shuffle. Edward, tell me that my daughter did not just say what I thought I heard, he growled into my ear, and I hadn't felt that level of nervousness in talking to my father-in-law since I'd asked his permission to marry Bella. She is 19 years old. I thought you said you were waiting. Bella's arms wrapped around my legs tightly. Oh God, she could hear him. I repeatedly smoothed my hand over her hair as she brought her knees to her chest. Sir, I began, knowing that Charlie was a privilege that was out the window for now. We weren't trying to conceive. It was a surprise to both of us. You swore you'd take care of her, Cullen. I trusted you. And now, she's going to have a baby when she's still just a kid herself. Before she can go to college or even really live at all, Charlie continued fiercely. But the emotion heavy in his voice betrayed him. He was worried about his little girl, and terrified that she wasn't ready to become a mother. Chief Swan, this baby wasn't planned, but I will still do everything in my power to take care of her and our child, I said, making every attempt to defuse the situation between us. With my reenlistment, they will both be taken care of and Bella will still be able to go back to school whenever she is ready. The line went silent again, and I found myself checking the phone as well to see if the call had disconnected. Bella lifted her head from my lap and looked at me, shaking her head. You didn't tell him about that? I asked in a whisper once I'd covered the mouthpiece with my fingers, and again she shook her head. Shit. Edward? His voice came through again, and I swallowed hard. Yes, sir? You're re-upping? He asked tensely, though not seemingly in anger, and I responded affirmatively. And Bella's okay with that? I turned my gaze to my wife and stroked her cheek lightly with the backs of my fingers and then pulled her to my side and kissed her forehead. We have discussed it at length, and yes, she is. Can I talk to her again, please? He asked, his voice dropping another octave. Of course, I replied and held the phone out to her. Bella took it hesitantly and closed her eyes as she brought it to her ear. She listened for a moment as he spoke, her head resting on my shoulder with tears spilling down her face. Yes, Dad, I'm really okay. This is the best thing for our family. Her eyes reopened to look at me, her hand resting on my leg, and I covered it with mine. We'll still come home to visit when we can, but this is right for us, and we're happy with this. I'm happy, she said, giving me a gentle squeeze. Okay, Dad, I will. I love you too. Bella's face buried into my chest the instant she ended the call and tossed her phone onto the table, sliding her arm tightly around my waist. You okay, baby? Yeah, she murmured softly with a slight nod. You need to tell your family. If my dad was this hard, I can't imagine telling your brother without a complete nervous breakdown. I ran my hand along her back as I held her against me. Bella was dreading telling Emmett, and most especially Rosalie, about the baby. They had still been trying to conceive with no success in over a year, and it was really taking a toll on Rose. To hear that we'd done so with such ease, without trying and using contraception, even I could understand why Bella would be nervous about telling her. Hell, so was I. Don't worry, Bella, I'll take care of it, I replied, lifting her chin with my fingertips, and kissed her gently. I gave her a small smile and turned her to rest back against the couch, lowering onto my knees in front of her with my hands on her hips. Tell Mommy that Daddy's got it all under control and to relax. All she needs to worry about is making a nice little home for you for the next few months, right? Right? Bella laughed as I leaned in and pressed a kiss to the very subtle bump rising from her middle. I'd been waiting for her to start showing visible proof that my child was growing inside her. She thought I was crazy in seeing things, but I knew every inch of my wife's body by sight and feel better than I knew my own. And there was definitely a small bump, and the firmness of her abdomen had increased significantly, so I wasn't crazy. Her hand ran along the back of my head and I could feel her begin to relax slowly. You're so cute when you talk to our baby like that. I love hearing you call yourself Daddy, too. You look so happy. I am Bella, and thank you, I replied, sliding my arms around her waist and settling my head on her chest. For what? You helped? You know, she teased softly, and her fingers drew circles on my neck. Well, aside from having my baby, to which I only contributed the fun part, I said with a small chuckle, and then looked up to her with a serious expression, for saying what you did to your father tonight. I know it wasn't easy for you, but I really do want you to be happy, Bella, and I really want to be the man to make that happen in every way I can. Then never change, Bella whispered softly and pressed a palm to my cheek, leaning forward to kiss me. You make me so happy and I love the way you love me. I loved her the only way I knew how, with all of me. Edward's parents had taken the news somewhat differently. While definitely surprised about the pregnancy, neither of them were as stunned by his follow-through on the re-enlistment plans, as he had informed them about it beforehand. After our talk, Edward really was so much his father's son and very devoted to his career, and Carlisle honestly couldn't have been prouder of him. His mother had been devastated when he announced his wish to re-enlist, and gave him a bit of her own silent treatment. The following day, she and I spoke on the phone, and she actually sounded afraid. For her son, of course, but also what it meant for our marriage. Then, from one army wife to a veteran one, we sat and talked for hours, and we both felt a lot better afterward. In a way that only Esme could understand, having stood beside Carlisle throughout his 25-year career. I expressed things that even some of my friends there in Virginia couldn't grasp. Edward hadn't forced me into anything, especially since I'd been going on post more and getting involved there, such as in the planning of the 4th of July picnic the previous summer. I'd actually been happier. I seemed to fit in more with the friends I'd made there than I ever had with the ones I'd had in Phoenix and even Forks. Angela, Mike and Alice were very dear to me, as was Rosalie, but I'd always felt different, and I could never figure out why, until I came into my life with Edward. Being raised by my father, life had been unpredictable with his profession as a police officer. In that respect, I wasn't all that much different from my husband. We both grew up knowing that every time Dad left for work, it might have been for the last time. And while one would think it would deter us from entering into such a life as that for ourselves, nothing else quite fit us. In the 3 days I wasn't speaking to him, I did a lot of thinking and realized all these things, and it was a bit difficult to grasp at first. A normal, simple life probably would have been great for a while, and we could have been happy together, but something would always feel missing for the both of us. Edward was a soldier through and through from the time he was a child, and I knew that when I married him. I was more upset by his broken promise and the way he reacted to my pregnancy, and not sitting down and talking to me about our plans for the future, than the actual desire to re-enlist. The military was a scary place, no question about it, but what was more terrifying was settling for something less than who we both were, just because it was safer. It would be like Sue asking my father to strip off his badge and gun because of the boys for the same reason. Could he have managed to get by and support them in another profession, like a businessman? Most likely. But her partner, future husband, and father of her children was a cop just as mine was a soldier. And I wanted to raise my own kids as my father had done with me, and Esme and Carlisle had with their boys, to think for and stay true to themselves. The best way for both Edward and I to do that would be to set the example ourselves, while still making sure our children knew exactly how much their mother and father loved them. After that conversation with my mother-in-law, I could hear both the tears and the smile in her voice. She was relieved that, not only did I have no intention of leaving Edward and would continue to stand by him, but that I also had a mind of my own, and still reminded her so much of herself when she and Carlisle were younger. And with a heavy heart of a mother, she gave Edward her blessing as well to re-enlist. That hard part was over. However, if there was one thing I could say about being pregnant, it would be that it was just a bit overrated. Although, I would admit to being grateful to Edward not only for being so understanding with my mood swings and increasing incidences of not wanting to be touched with my achiness and constant need to pee, I was also very grateful to him for being persistent with me about going out and making friends. If it wasn't for Emma and the girls, I was sure I'd have spent far more time in tears than I already was. I feel like such a horrible mother already, Emma, I said softly one Saturday when Edward and I both came over for a visit with our friends, running a hand over my very slight baby bump. This is supposed to be a happy time, right? We're having a baby, and Edward is doing so much better with this than I am. Well, he's not the one carrying the baby, is he? Emma replied with a smile, reaching over to rest her hand on my shoulder. It doesn't make you a bad mother at all. Every pregnancy is different, and at least you're not throwing things at your husband yet. I chuckled softly, shaking my head as I thought back to her telling of what her pregnancy with Sammy had been like. Her morning sickness and heartburn played tag team with each other throughout the duration of it, in addition to attempting to get through her wedding at City Hall, in between bouts of vomiting and peeing. I just wish the nausea would pass. It's going to make for a very long road trip home next week. Still no luck convincing him to fly out. Huh? Emma asked, taking a sip of her tea. I shook my head and sighed. He's turned into this massive papa bear, and no matter how many times the doctor has assured him that I'm safe to travel, he won't put his pregnant wife on an airplane. Plus the tickets for this time of year are outrageous, so it actually is cheaper to drive, but it's going to seem like forever to get to Forks. You'll be fine. Just remember the crackers and ginger ale, Emma replied with a grin, and I visibly shuddered. I didn't like ginger ale before I'd gotten pregnant, like when my father used to give it to me as a kid whenever I'd gotten sick. The taste of it really disgusted me, but damn if it worked to settle my stomach, and still did. Though I didn't know if it would have any effect with what I'd be facing the following week. My dad was slowly coming around to the idea of becoming a grandfather, even though the twins were just about 9 months old and running him more ragged by the day. He and Edward had another man-to-man talk just after Thanksgiving, and the tension between them had seemed to significantly decrease after that. However, I knew that he was still waiting to see me to be sure that I was really okay with Edward's re-enlistment, even though I'd called him the week before to assure him of it, after watching my husband swear in once again. And Sue had done her best to keep him calm about it as well, understanding all too well how a surprise pregnancy can really alter one's plans for the future, but how amazing things can turn out afterward. My in-laws, on the other hand, were an entirely different story. They were actually very excited for the arrival of our baby, if not a little stunned by the fact that we would be fulfilling it before Emmett and Rose. Since his retirement from the army himself and his subsequent battle and recovery from cancer, he and Esme had been anxious to start living out what they considered one of the best times of their lives. Growing old together, seeing both their boys happily married, and looking forward to filling their home with pictures of their grandchildren and spoiling them rotten. Then there was my brother and sister-in-law. Emmett had offered the both of us a heartfelt congratulations and beamed over the idea of becoming a biological uncle, even though he adored Sarah Lynn more than any uncle by blood ever could. His baby brother becoming a father was a big deal to Emmett, and he was genuinely excited for us. To her credit, Rosalie really tried to put on her best poker face, and there was no doubt in my mind that deep down, she was happy for us. Yet, as with any woman trying unsuccessfully to conceive, I could hear the heartbreak in her voice when I spoke to her, and things had been slightly strained between us since. It hurt a little, but I understood completely and hoped that she would feel a little better by the time we got back to Forks. I didn't want to upset her more, especially since I was starting to show. Jasper had been having the time of his life teasing Edward with his "I told you so" jabs, but still conferring onto him all the joys of fatherhood. Meanwhile, Alice couldn't wait to go out baby shopping with me, and had already been boxing up some of Sarah Lynn's old toys, car seat, and clothes that her daughter had outgrown or never even used, since she'd been sure that she was having a boy. None of them were too masculine, but both she and Jasper liked dressing her in pink and frills. My only worry about seeing them again was how much weight we'd be carrying home with us in the back seat of my car. Like we've all told you, it will all be worth it the second you hold that little baby in your arms for the first time, Emma said, obviously noticing my drifting thoughts. And the moment you see your husband holding your child, there's not much in the world that beats that. I looked over my shoulder and saw Edward bouncing little Sammy on his lap, and making the 1-year-old shriek with giggles, and I couldn't help but smile. Yeah, he's going to be a great dad. Edward, you need to pull over again, I said, leaning my head back against the rest. Again? We just stopped 30 miles ago, Edward answered with a sigh, turning the signal on to change lanes. That was to pee. This time, not so much, I replied, my eyes closed as I attempted to breathe evenly to keep myself from spilling the contents of my stomach all over the car. It was your idea to drive, and I don't have the option of peeing in a bottle, and you really don't want to deal with vomit smell in the car all the way to Forks, right? Edward took my hand and smiled sympathetically as he pulled onto the off-ramp, and we'd barely made it to a McDonald's parking lot before I opened the door in time to vomit right outside it. I was so embarrassed that I wanted to hide in the back seat when one of the employees came over, dragging a sweeper broom and carrying a cup of water for me in his other hand. My husband had come around to my side of the car, and once the mess had been cleared away, crouched down beside me and held the cup for me while I started to cry. "Hey, calm down, baby. It's all right." No, it's not. The whole restaurant just saw me throw up, and we're not even through Wisconsin yet, and Pennsylvania was bad enough, and that damn blink we were in Illinois. No, I couldn't even manage to keep my cookies down there either. "It's humiliating, Edward," I sobbed hysterically, and even I knew I sounded a little bit on the crazy side at that moment, but pregnancy was not my friend right then. "You were right, I know you were. If I can't handle the motion sickness from a car, I wouldn't have done well on a plane either. But God, baby, this really is so embarrassing." I felt Edward's lips press against my temple, and I lowered my head to his shoulder, and his arms wrapped around me. And like I said in Pennsylvania and Illinois, the likelihood of you ever seeing any one of these people again in your lifetime is like 1 in a billion. So even if you got out and waved your arms around and maybe even did some handsprings, it wouldn't matter. "You want me to walk you to the bathroom to brush your teeth?" I nodded against him, and he slowly pulled back to help me out of the car, even carrying my purse in his hand as I walked beside him with my head down. I knew I wasn't the first woman to ever get motion sickness while pregnant, but in the moment, it always feels that way when you're avoiding stares and even sympathetic whispers when they spotted my stomach as my shirt tugged in just the right way. I hurried through brushing my teeth as quickly as I could to get out of there and back on the road, anxious as hell to get to Forks and rest. For the remainder of the trip, I religiously nibbled on saltines and sipped at the ginger ale, even when it was my turn to drive, trying to ward off as many side trips as I possibly could. Luckily, we only had 2 more instances, and one was about 3 miles from Forks. Needless to say, I was in desperate need of a shower once we reached the Cullens' house, before I could even hug anyone. Thankfully, his parents understood, but by the time I came back downstairs, Emmett and Rosalie had arrived from picking up Grandma Platt from the airport. My sister-in-law sincerely tried to mask the tears in her eyes when she greeted me, but needed to excuse herself shortly thereafter to the bathroom. The last thing I wanted to do was upset her, so we decided to head over to my father's house to visit with him, Sue and the boys for a while before dinner. Emmett's tests came back. "They won't be having a baby the old-fashioned way," Edward said suddenly, more than halfway through the drive, his body tense. "Oh no, he's infertile?" I asked with my hand rising to my mouth, and Edward nodded slowly, and I sighed. I knew it was the only option left, since her results had come back perfectly normal. But it was still heartbreaking to hear. No wonder she can't stand the sight of me. "Bella, you know that's not true. Rosalie loves you. They just got the news 2 days ago." She's still coming to terms with it and a little upset with Emmett because he would rather go the route of adoption than to ask his brother to donate sperm, Edward said uncomfortably, his hands ringing around the steering wheel, and his gaze fixed forward. My eyes widened, and I turned to face him more fully as he pulled into my father's driveway. "Wait a second, my sister-in-law wants to have my husband's baby." Edward took my hand inside, looking over at me finally. "Baby, don't be upset with her. She's not thinking straight right now. Emmett isn't comfortable with it, and neither am I. She wants to have Emmett's baby and can't. And whether they went through adoption or a random sperm donor, it still wouldn't be his." "Well, neither would yours," I gasped, still in complete disbelief. "It would be a Cullen with a similar genetic makeup as her husband, and obviously, I'm fertile since I already made a baby," Edward replied, and squeezed my hand gently when I stiffened, shaking his head. "Bella, Emmett and I have both said no, and even if I could have considered it for a moment, I couldn't do that to you. You're the only one I ever want to have my babies. Just give her a little time to come to her senses." I nodded, gazing down at his fingers splayed across the small bulge of my abdomen. I understood, really I did, but the thought of anyone other than myself, even someone I loved as much as I did Rosalie, carrying my husband's baby, made me more than a little uneasy. "Okay?" he asked when I didn't reply with words, and I brought my hand to cover his, holding it protectively against my stomach. "Please don't be mad at her." "I'm not," I whispered, shaking my head, "and I'll act as if I don't know anything. I know she doesn't actually want your baby really, and wouldn't have even given it a thought under any other circumstances. And thank you for not keeping this from me." People know better than to tell me anything they never want you to know. I'm horrible at keeping secrets from you, Edward replied with a smile, and leaned toward me to brush his lips on mine. Good, now come on before my father wears a hole in the floor with his pacing, I said, chuckling softly and exiting the car. I knew my dad would have heard us pull in and was anxious to see me, even if he wasn't being obvious by looming in the doorway. I was proven right when it swung open before I could knock, and he stood there holding Aiden. Hi, Daddy. My father smiled and held one arm out for me, and I stepped into his embrace, hugging him tightly. Hi, baby. Have a good trip? Oh, you really don't want to ask that. I answered with a shake of my head and pulled back to offer him a smile that seemed to soothe him slightly, and I turned my eyes to my brother. Aiden, hey there, buddy, come here. My dad's hold on the baby tightened a little when I reached for him, and I gazed at him in confusion. You sure you're okay to pick him up? He's pretty heavy. Charlie, stop. She'll be fine to hold a 19-pound baby, Sue said as she entered the room with a sleeping Adam on her shoulder. He was the same way when I was pregnant. Even a gallon of milk sent him into a frenzy. I laughed a little as she kissed my cheek and finally took Aiden into my arms. Oh my, you are getting so big, little man. I've missed you. How can you tell the difference? Edward asked, looking between the two babies after greeting my father. They look so much alike now. Aiden is still a bit bigger and has more hair, and he has brown eyes while Adam's are more hazel, I replied, gazing at Aiden and making him giggle with the higher pitch of my voice. Adam's eyes are closed, Edward pointed out, and I gazed at him with a raised eyebrow. He laughed and placed his hand on my stomach, whispering, please be alone in there. That doesn't work, Edward, trust me, my father added, shaking his head. Sue and I laughed, both of us seemingly relieved that the tension we were anticipating between Edward and my father wasn't nearly as bad as we'd thought it would be. Don't worry, Edward, twins run in my family. Bella's great-grandfather was a twin, my father said, and my husband's white eyes shot up to him. Dad, he was not, now stop it. I scolded him and felt Edward relax some beside me. I know, just trying to get a rise out of your husband. You can't expect me to have no fun with him, Bella. My dad smirked and began making his way to the kitchen. Beer, Edward? My husband's eyes met mine questioningly, and I nodded after my father. Go ahead, it doesn't look like he's going to bite. Just relax. Yes, sir, Edward replied and followed his path down the hall. The visit with my family was a lot more relaxed than anything I'd expected. My dad and Edward spent quite a while talking in the kitchen while Sue and I sat with the boys, but it wasn't long before we heard them laughing together. I was holding myself together well for a good 2 hours, even when I had to get up to use the bathroom a few times, until I watched Aiden crawling across the floor, and I broke down in tears. He was getting so big, so fast, and even though my own baby was still months away from being born, I began imagining the first roll-over crawl, step, word, and I couldn't stop crying. Edward came into the room with my father, his forehead etched in concern. Bella, what's the matter? I felt his hand brush my hair back as he sat beside me, his eyes taking inventory of me. I pointed to Aiden, who was also looking at me as if I'd lost my mind, and a sob escaped me. He crawled. Okay, baby, I think you are long overdue for a nap. We should probably head back to my parents', Edward said, stroking my back through my protests. You've barely slept since yesterday, and we've still got over a week. We're not leaving tomorrow. My father crouched in front of me with his hands on my knees. He's right, honey, we'll still see you plenty, and we were invited over to the Cullens for Christmas. You need your rest. I nodded reluctantly, kissing the top of Adam's head and then standing from the couch, saying goodbye to my dad and Sue. I pressed my lips to Aiden's forehead as well when my father lifted him into his arms, and Edward guided me back out to the car. God, when is this going to stop? This is so stupid. Crying over nothing. I can't even visit my family for a few hours without a crying jag. Edward settled me into my seat and jogged around to get in himself. You're just tired, baby. It's been a long couple of days. Don't be so hard on yourself. We didn't even make it all the way to his parents' house before I cried myself to sleep, and I woke up in a darkened room, in Edward's old bed. I was so comfortable that I didn't want to move, but my stomach actually rumbled with hunger rather than nausea, so I figured I probably should. When I made it to the bottom of the stairs, I heard the entire family still gathered in the living room, and Edward immediately stood when I entered. He quietly inquired as to whether I was okay, since apparently, I'd been sleeping for more than 7 hours, which was unheard of for me, especially since becoming pregnant and during the day. At that, Yeah, I'm fine. Maybe we just need to bring that bed back home with us. I forgot how comfortable it is. I joked and stepped into his arms, resting my face against his chest. I barely caught Rosalie's eye across the room before her gaze lowered to her lap, and even saw the hint of color rise on her cheeks. She knew I was aware of her request. Hello, awkward visit home. Thankfully, it didn't turn out to be as bad as I'd feared it would. By the time Christmas Eve rolled around a couple of days later, she finally came to me and apologized for putting Edward and I on the spot that way. Even if I'd wanted to be mad at her, one look at her drawn features and bloodshot eyes would have broken me. She was literally devastated by the news they'd received, and I could see how much it hurt her when she placed her hand on my stomach. Well, I can still be a favorite aunt, right? She said with a forced smile. And I pulled her into a hug. I really could not, and wouldn't ever desire to, imagine being in her position. With the most difficult part of the visit behind us, we all seemed to focus on simply enjoying our time together, and even Alice and Jasper joined us. Sarah Lynn hovered over the twins all Christmas Day, like a miniature mother, going so far as to shush the entire room. When Adam fell asleep on the floor, "SHHH, baby C-pin," she whispered before crawling into Uncle Edward's lap to do the same thing herself. By the time we were getting ready to leave to head back to Virginia, I found myself feeling a whole lot better about leaving everyone behind that time. Carlisle and Esme were doing well. My dad and Sue were finally talking about getting married sometime in the following year. Emmett and Rosalie were making slow progress, but they were a great team together. They'd make it through the hurdle life had thrown them in time. And Alice and Jasper were still Alice and Jasper, content just as they were in their life with their daughter. Everyone near and dear to us were good, just as we were. I would miss them all and always be a little homesick, but Forks and everyone in it would always be there, no matter where Edward and I called home at any given time. And we could always come back anytime. No goodbye was forever there. About halfway through my 6th month, I finally began to understand what Emma and some of the other women I'd talked to meant when they told me that their pregnancies were one of the best things they'd ever experienced. Once the nausea began lessening, I actually felt really great, and when the baby started moving more, there was a relief that washed over me I hadn't known I'd been waiting for. Edward and I would spend hours lying on our bed watching the little bumps and rolls rise from my belly, and I couldn't remember ever seeing him so fascinated by anything in all the time we'd know each other. Then, as I was approaching my 30th week, I was scheduled for another ultrasound, and he desperately wanted to be there with me, but couldn't get the time off from training, so I promised to give him a full report when he got home that night. He'd been anxious to find out what we were having while I wasn't so sure that I wanted to know, and had actually been a bit grateful in the past when the baby never turned in a way that made it possible to determine the sex. However, the instant that the technician told me that everything looked good and was measuring perfectly, but he could also tell me the sex, my curiosity finally got the better of me. I told him to type it on the printout to show Edward and seal it, so that he and I could find out together. I'd be able to wait that long. I would. Yet, as I stood there in the kitchen later that afternoon baking cookies and setting the meat for dinner to marinate, my eyes locked on that envelope hanging on the refrigerator door by a magnet when I closed it. Part of me did want to find out with him, while another wanted to see my husband's face when I told him whether we were having a boy or a girl. In the end, my selfish side won out. I wanted that. I convinced myself that he wouldn't mind me knowing first as I pulled the envelope from beneath the magnet and hurried over to sit on the couch. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, placing one hand on my stomach. "Whichever you are, Mommy and Daddy love you," I whispered to our baby, and then brought my gaze to the envelope again, sliding my finger beneath the seal. I growled in frustration when my shaking hands wouldn't allow me to open it delicately, and finally ripped off the end. Pulling out the blurry image of our baby, I held it in front of me, and tears sprung to my eyes, but smiled broadly as I read that small printed word with a little arrow beside it. Boy. We were having a boy. Edward had never stated a preference, but I could admit that I had really wanted a boy. To give my husband a son, a daddy's girl would have been amazing, and I'd even envisioned him with a daughter, doting on her as he did with Sarah Lynn, and spoiling her absolutely rotten. However, when I pictured him with a son, it held unique and special qualities of its own. the pride in his eyes as he held a miniature version of himself, teaching his little boy to run and play ball when he got old enough, the father-son camping trips where mommies were just not allowed, creating the same memories with his son that he held himself of his own father in the times his dad was around. Carlisle had always made the most of the time he had with his boys while he was home, and it showed in how much both Emmett and Edward loved and respected their dad. And I knew my husband would learn well from that example and be the same amazing father as the one he'd been blessed with. For the first time in years, I actually burned a batch of cookies, lost as I was in my own thoughts, but surprisingly, I didn't care. I opened the window to air out the smell and threw them in the trash, barely noticing the cold air for outside with a smile so wide it hurt. Edward and I were having a boy. When he came home that night, he asked how everything went and then froze when he saw the tears in my eyes. "Bella, is something wrong with the baby? Are you okay?" he asked worriedly and made his way over to me. "I'm fine, and he's perfect," I replied, my smile returning full force as I nodded over my shoulder to the fridge when his eyes immediately widened. I thought it would take a moment for him to catch on, but I should have known by then that there was very little I could slip past that husband of mine, especially when it came to our baby. "We're having a boy?" he asked with a widening grin as he stared at the picture, but then turned his eyes to me. He took my face in his hands and pressed his lips firmly to mine, still tight from the intensity of his smile. "I made a son." "Hey, I was involved too, you know," I replied, jabbing him lightly in the abdomen with my knuckle. "And if you're anything like my mother, anytime our boy is in trouble, you will waste no time in reminding me that it was my chromosome that determined the sex. So, I'm gonna get my gloating in now, while I can," he said with a laugh, and I rolled my eyes, but couldn't help joining him as he wrapped his arms around me. His lips pressed to my hair, and my fingers clung to the back of his shirt, both of us absorbing the moment. His body trembled slightly in my hold and I ran my hands slowly along his back, slightly worried. "I'm fine." I lifted my head to look at him and he was pinching his eyes closed, moisture wringing them, and my heart started to pound. I brought my hand to his cheek and stroked it gently, pausing when his lips pressed to the heel of my palm. "Don't worry, I won't tell." Edward opened his eyes to gaze at me, and they were almost crystal green in color, with the welling tears. "This definitely ranks up there with the best moments in my entire life." "Thank you, baby. You're happy, then?" I asked, tugging lightly at my lip with my teeth. "You weren't hoping for a girl?" "Baby, I wouldn't have been disappointed either way, but little girls are more likely to give their daddies gray hair early. A few more years to prepare for that might do this daddy good," he teased, kissing me gently again. Month 8 was a bit more hectic. While I'd only gained 21 pounds by that point, everything seemed concentrated right around my middle. I was all baby as the girls enviously told me, but my hips hurt like crazy, and no one wanted to get me started on my breasts. Edward only had to look at them, and they would ache and throb. Touching them was out of the question. In the midst of all that, we received notice that we'd finally gotten our on-post housing. That meant moving and the packing that came along with it. At 8.5 months pregnant, not fun. Aside from the bigger place and the extra half an hour or so of sleep I'd be able to get in the mornings, the only other upside to moving at that point was that I was within walking distance of Emma's, only a few doors down. And then, on one of our return trips to the new house with another load in the U-Haul, we arrived to find a delivery truck parked outside. "Isabella Cullen?" the burly man asked when I stepped out, as Edward and Riley immediately began unloading. I nodded and he handed me the device he held. "Sign here, please." I did as requested and then stepped away when he whipped open the back door of the large, white truck. An equally massive man joined him from the passenger side, and they began pulling a large crate toward the waiting lift. "Where would you like us to put it, ma'am?" he asked once they were on the ground. "The bedroom, please. Down the hall, first door on the right," Edward said as he came back out, sliding his arm around me and kissing my temple. "What did you do?" I asked, looking up at him suspiciously. "I did nothing," he replied, pointing to his chest with a smirk. "My parents just sent us a little housewarming present." "You call that little?" My eyes widened and I moved as quickly as I could toward the house, breathing a little hard by the time I reached the bedroom door. I patted my hands along the large crate, trying to figure out how to open it to see what was inside, and then the men returned carrying a mattress with Edward and Riley right behind them with a box spring. "Oh my God, is this what I think it is? And I'm a little bitter, just so you know. I think my parents like you more than they like me," Edward replied with a nod, but immediately began laughing. "You said you liked it, baby. Edward's bed from Forks. The mattress was like lying on a cloud, and I slept better than I had in months over the week or so we'd spent on it over Christmas. And there it was, standing in our new bedroom. I pulled off the plastic covering and swept my hand over the mattress, admiring the velvety softness beneath my fingers. Edward had replaced it himself not too long after we'd gotten together. He had complained that his previous one was older than he was, but I knew he'd done it, so I would be more comfortable lying on it myself or sharing it with him. I was the first and only woman to share that mattress with him. I can't believe they did this. It had to have cost a fortune to ship it out here. I was kidding, I said with my fingers covering my lips. They love you, Bella. They'll do anything to make you happy, but you never asked for much. So they were ecstatic for the unintentional bone you threw them with this. Just wait until Edge is born. You haven't seen anything yet, Edward replied with a chuckle and a gentle squeeze of my arm. I thought you hated the idea of a junior, I gasped, looking up at him in disbelief. We'd been seriously discussing names since we found out we were having a boy, and I had really wanted to name our firstborn after his father. Edward had been pretty adamant thus far about not subjecting his son to a childhood of Eddie's, and the relentless teasing of such an old man's name, and hadn't shown any sign of giving up the fight before then. But then again, neither had I, and I was determined to get my way on this, one way or another. He shrugged slightly, and I noticed the hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. It's kinda grown on me. Edge sounds pretty cool, actually. So, I guess this would be a bad time to tell you that I've been swaying toward Micah, right? I teased and laughed when his palm came to his forehead with a sigh. Edward, I'm kidding. My dad is right. You are way too easy to get a rise out of. Now, I'm going to go call my mother-in-law and thank her while I watch you men unload and sweat. Edward rolled his eyes as I pecked his lips and shuffled out of the room. One of the few perks of being pregnant? Yep, you betcha, I called back shamelessly as I dug my phone out of my purse. The final month was the worst, though not in the way I'd thought it would be. Sure, the last few pounds I'd gained made its mark on my discomfort level, and the renewed need to go to the bathroom every 20 or 30 minutes, with the pressure on my bladder as well. Yet, what really got to me was the boredom. Once everything was unpacked, the baby's room was set up, my hospital bag ready to go, and the car seat situated in the used SUV that Edward had traded in the car he bought in Maryland for, I had next to nothing to do. Being on my feet too long made my ankles swell, so too much time in the kitchen was out. I'd read all my baby and expectant parent books over the past few months, and aside from the occasional load of laundry, there was little housework for me to do. So I took up crocheting and soap operas and long conversations with my belly telling him to finish growing, but please make it quick. Yup, Mom was losing her marbles. My tune changed once again about 2 weeks before my due date. The girls assured me that what I was feeling was completely normal, especially for a first baby, and not knowing what to expect, but I felt like a coward. The thought of labor and delivery scared me, and birth videos did not help with that at all. How am I supposed to push this big baby out of this? I asked Edward one night, gesturing down to my body. Bella, the doctor said that he'll only weigh about 7 pounds at most. He's not too big, Edward said, trying to comfort me, and unfortunately, not doing so well. Do you want to imagine pushing a 7-pound baby out of a very small space in that area of your body? I retorted, causing him to wince and shift his hips back slightly. Yeah, that's what I thought. Edward leaned over to kiss my belly as he did every night before we went to sleep. You won't hurt Mommy much, right? You don't want to be an only child, kiddo. Emma threw me a surprise baby shower the following day, and it definitely was a surprise. She wanted to wait until Esme arrived from Washington to spend the first few weeks with us once the baby came home, as well as Edward's grandmother. We were definitely going to have a full house for a while, but I knew that having them around for even that little bit of time would be invaluable. My friends were amazing and would be great support, but there was something to be said about the wisdom passed down from generation to generation, and I was really looking forward to that insight from my son's grandmother and great-grandmother. The gathering of women was definitely bigger than I'd had at my bridal shower, but I also didn't feel the dread I had then in regards to gifts. Naturally, I didn't take into account the after-the-baby gifts for myself and Edward, but mostly, it was all baby things. Lots of packages of diapers and wipes, more honestlies than I could ever imagine needing, although I was assured I'd use every single one. A swing that played Winnie the Pooh, a beautiful stroller from SM, blankets, outfits, shoes. I had no idea how I was going to get it all home, or where I was going to put it all once I did. And then, Grandma Platt set a box on my lap and smiled at me. This was something I gave both my boys when they were little, just continuing the tradition. I pulled at the ribbon holding it close and lifted the top, and I was speechless when I saw what was inside. It was a tiny camouflage outfit that resembled his daddy's Aku from the Little Patrol cap, the Cullen name patch across from the US Army on the jacket, right down to the tan combat boots. Lying beneath it was a frame with 2 pictures set on a mat, one of Emmett and one of Edward, each of them maybe a year or 2 old, in their father's arms, and wearing matching uniforms. Even back then, Edward held himself a little straighter than Emmett had, already mirroring his father so much more than his carefree brother did. Beneath them was an empty spot, waiting for Edge's picture with his daddy. "Oh my God, this is precious," I said with a broad smile, lifting the tiny garments in my hands and gazing at them. I laid them over my stomach, and Emma snapped a picture of me on my phone, and I texted it to Edward. While we were starting to eat, he finally texted back with "Grandma strikes again, huh?" I thought first pregnancies tended to go early, I said during my daily walk with Emma 2 days before my due date, stroking my stomach. At my last doctor's appointment the previous Friday, I was told that I was starting to dilate, and the baby was settled into my pelvis in proper position, so delivery could be at any time. I just wasn't contracting yet. I thought for sure that my water would break, and we'd have our baby by the end of the weekend. No such luck. My doctor had suggested walks, but the only thing that gravity had its effect on was, once again, my need to use the bathroom. I so wasn't going to miss that part of my pregnancy. I'd even gotten desperate enough to ask Edward to have sex with me to get things moving, as I'd read in a few of my books was nearly foolproof. However, making love in general had been uncomfortable for me for a while, and he didn't like the idea of causing me pain just to stimulate the greater one of labor. So walking in gravity it was, even if it was only back and forth between the 2 houses. "He'll come when he's ready." "Sammy was a few days late," Emma replied, linking her arm with mine. "You're supposed to agree with me, Emma," I groaned, but then laughed and looked down to my tummy. "Don't listen to her. You want to come out and meet everyone, right? Yesterday wasn't our day, but today is. I have a good feeling about this. That and I really need to pee again." "Okay, almost there," Emma replied as we made our way up the front walk to me house and helped me to the bathroom. Yet when I sat down, nothing happened until, "Oh shit, Emma, call Edward," I yelled at the door, my hand trembling as it rested on my stomach. "I'm pretty sure my water just broke." "Okay, Bella, you are just about to 10, almost fully effaced, and the baby is starting to crown. We're going to be pushing here in a bit," the nurse told me as she finished examining me upon getting settled into my room. My head shot up to look at her with widened eyes, and shook it sharply. "What? No, my water just broke. Labor is supposed to take hours." "Honey, you've most likely been in labor for hours," she replied, picking up the phone to page the doctor. "No, I haven't felt anything all morning until my water broke." "I would have felt contractions, wouldn't I? This can't be right," I protested, starting to cry as I looked up at Emma. "He's not here yet. I can't have this baby without him here." "You called him, didn't you?" "Bella, you were right there when I called him," Emma answered soothingly, running her hand over my hair. "And he's on his way. He'll be here, don't worry." A contraction finally hit me right then. That explained every single horror story ever known to womankind. It felt as if my child was literally trying to split me in half on his way out, and I swore I might have heard a couple of bones crack in Emma's hand from my grip. "Where is he?" I screamed out and looked over to the door as it opened, releasing a sob when it was my doctor and not my husband, barely able to answer his questions in my distress. "Bella, look at me. Breathe. It's going to be okay. He'll get here," Emma said, drawing my attention to her by patting the back of my hand. "All right, sweetie. We need to get you prepped. Your baby's head is right there. He's coming," my doctor said, barely making contact with the stool at my feet, before rising again to get prepared himself. "No, please. I need Edward," I cried as the nurse began propping up my legs. I couldn't believe that he was so close but would still miss the birth of our first child. "It's not supposed to be this way." "I'm sorry, Bella, but this little guy isn't waiting. I'm going to need you to push with this next contraction coming up," my doctor instructed gently, snapping his gloves on. I pleadingly looked at Emma and she nodded, saying she would try Edward again as she stepped out into the hall, already dialing her phone. After a deep breath, I began to push as my doctor instructed, momentarily distracted from my thoughts as pain seared through me. Even though it relented some when I stopped, I started sobbing again as I leaned my head back on the pillow. Edward, where are you? Emma, where is she? I heard from outside the door a second before it burst open and finally, there stood my husband, still in his uniform with cap in hand. I cried out his name and he hurried over to me, taking my hand and kissing my sweaty brow. God, I'm so sorry, baby. I got here as fast as I could. I didn't think you'd be pushing already. Well, you can confer with your son about that in a few minutes. For all the taking his sweet time over the last few days, he's the one in a rush today, I replied tensely, feeling the build-up of another contraction begin. Edward helped me to sit up again like the doctor requested, his arm wrapped securely around my back as I began to push again. Oh my God, don't do that when I'm mid-push, Edward, I ground out through clenched teeth, digging my nails into the back of the hand that held mine. I'm sorry, honey, but he's right there, Edward whispered as I sunk back against his arm, pressing his lips to my hair. And see, he's not even born yet, and he's already my son. Shut up, I replied with a laugh, far too relieved to actually have him there to bother screaming at him, as I'd seen in countless birth videos and movie scenes. As much as it hurt and I really wanted him to come out already, the look I saw on Edward's face in between pushes as he watched me give birth to his son was priceless, and something I would remember for the rest of my life. He wasn't pale or green, ready to throw up, pass out, or run from the room. He was amazed, mesmerized, if not a little bit nervous. He was about to become a father, as I was about to become a mother. Okay, the head is out. One more good push should do it and you will have your son, the doctor announced, and I gave a weak smile, trying to breathe through the pain. You ready, Bella? I nodded and sat up again, gripping Edward's hand tightly and pinching my eyes closed. A loud groan escaped me until I finally felt our baby fall free from my body and lowered back onto the bed with Edward's lips pressed to my forehead. Our son was placed on my stomach, and my husband and I both looked down to gaze upon the beautiful child we created together as he cut the cord. A fine, silky layer of dark hair covered his head, and his shuddering cry made his tiny rosebud-shaped lips tremble. I reached down to run my fingertips over his cheek, and I was so overwhelmed by the fact that we'd made such a perfect little boy. Edge was pink and healthy, with an excellent pair of lungs on him. When they took him away to clean him up and weigh him, I began to cry harder. The love I already felt for our son throughout my pregnancy had grown immeasurably the instant I laid eyes on him, and I never wanted to let him go, even for a moment. And when I finally looked up to my husband, I saw the same level of emotion coursing over his features as he gazed across the room at our baby. I love you, I whispered to him, brushing my lips against his jaw, and he turned his head to look at me, kissing me firmly. I love you too, he replied, resting his forehead against my hair. So much, baby. When Edward left to announce the birth of our son to everyone in the waiting room, I lay in bed holding Edge in my arms and watched him sleep. At just under 7 pounds, he looked so tiny and fragile, his little palm barely more than the width of my thumb. I could not figure out whether he looked more like Edward or myself, although there were very defining features of the both of us in him. My nose, Edward's eyes, despite the blue color that I prayed would darken to the jade hue of his father's to match the long eyelashes he'd inherited from him as well, though much thinner as a newborn. My lips, his chin, my fingers, his ears. He was just absolutely perfect. A knock came to my door, and I looked over to find Edward standing there, with his mother, grandmother, and Emma visible right behind him. Are you two ready for visitors? Of course, I replied with a smile and shifted slightly, trying not to wake our sleeping baby, very unsuccessfully. Yet, he didn't cry. He simply opened his eyes and wiggled a little, and gave a wide yawn. Oh my goodness, look at him. He's so beautiful, Esme cried as she gazed down at Edge and looked back to Grandma Platt. Mom, come here. Give an old lady a chance to waddle over, Grandma replied lightheartedly, and shuffled over to stand beside my bed. Well, aren't you just a little peanut? You look just like your daddy, sweetheart. Oh, I see plenty of Bella in him too, Esme said, reaching out to touch his soft cheek. You want to hold him, Grandma? Edward asked, and the older woman's face lit up with her nod as she settled into the chair behind her. He gently lifted Edge from my arms, and I couldn't help but smile when his own features shifted, his eyes bright as he spoke softly. Edward Anthony Cullen Jr., meet your great-grandma. Tears filled Grandma Platt's eyes as he laid the baby in her arms, and she cradled them around him. I can't believe I'm holding my great-grandbaby. Oh, life is good. Emma approached me, giving me a gentle hug and then turning to do the same to Edward. Congratulations, you guys. He's gorgeous. Thank you, we both answered at the same time, and I asked, where's Riley? He's picking up Sammy from Carol's. They should be here soon, Emma replied, her gaze returning to Edge. Good, she's gotta come meet her future husband, Edward teased, and she elbowed his arm with a laugh. Edward, he's not even a full 2 hours old, and you're already trying to set him up? I groaned, rolling my eyes. He's a Cullen. He's going to be a little heartbreaker, aren't you, darling boy? Grandma Platt cooed at him, and Esme and I shared a look. Oh yeah, we were all in trouble. For the most part, I measured time like any other soldier. But in the days following the birth of my son, that changed. Time was remembered by moments. The cry following his first breath that took my own away. Touching my little boy's tiny hand and watching it flex for the first time. Watching him nurse at his mother's breast, as she nuzzled her nose against his cheek like he was the most important thing in her world. The first time I looked into those eyes of his and feeling that unique bond formed between a man and his son, as if it was a palpable, touchable thing. Becoming a father was both the best and most terrifying thing that had ever happened to me. The instant Edge was born, and I looked down at our tiny baby lying on my wife's stomach, a myriad of emotions flooded through me all at once. Awe that I had created part of this beautiful little boy with my amazing wife. Relief that both mother and child were perfect and healthy, erasing any worry I'd been harboring for months that something would go wrong, and I'd lose one or both of them. And then came the fear. Would I be a good father? Did I have what it took to be both a daddy and a husband? What if I held him too tight, fed him too much or too little, or dropped him? Or he was crying because something was wrong and I couldn't figure it out? All the things I hadn't thought much on while Bella was pregnant hit me full force as I gazed down at my son, living, breathing, and kicking right in front of me. Everything had happened so fast that day. I'd kissed Bella goodbye before I left, and she'd shown no sign that anything would happen that day, and even tried to convince me one last time to make love to her. I felt bad for saying no, but the thought of something so intimate between us causing such discomfort for her just didn't sit right with me, and made it nearly impossible to rise to the occasion, so to speak. Then, just after lunch, I got that call from Emma telling me that she was on her way to the hospital with Bella. Her water broke. I tried to remain calm, and luckily, it didn't take me long to be dismissed for the day, and I called my mother on the way out to the car. She and my grandmother had stayed behind while Emma left with Bella gathering a few last-minute things, and I thought I would have plenty of time to swing by and pick them up before heading to the hospital. As I was pulling into the parking lot, my phone started to ring again, and it was Emma. My heart leapt into my throat. Something was wrong. Edward, where the hell are you? Bella is crowning and about to start pushing, she said frantically. She's freaking out a bit that you aren't here yet. Shit, I'm right outside. I just need to park, I replied and relayed the message to my mother and grandmother, feeling a hint of my own panic rise as I gazed out at the jam-packed parking lot. What is every woman in Virginia giving birth today? Edward, just pull up to the entrance and get up there. I will park, my mom said, and I did as instructed, brushing a kiss on her cheek at the front of the car and passing with a thank you, and ran as fast as I could into the hospital. All the way up to the maternity ward, my mind was racing. I was about to become a father, and I was going to miss it. Bella was up there giving birth to our son, scared and alone, with the exception of Emma, but it should have been me up there. Then I spotted her in the hallway, and I felt my heart crumble. I'd missed it. Emma pointed to the door beside her at my request, and I threw it open, my eyes landing on my wife as she softly cried my name. The baby hadn't arrived yet. I'd made it. I thought I would have been one of those fathers that watched their child coming into the world and fought the urge to hit the floor, yet it was one of the most fascinating things I'd ever witnessed. At the first sight of that little face, I was a goner, and before I knew it, there he was. I cut the cord connecting him to Bella, but quickly brought my eyes back to him. I'd never felt such an instantaneous burst of love for anyone in my entire life as I did for my son right then and there. And I fell even more in love with my wife once again when I didn't think I could. My Bella, my beautiful wife, the mother of my child. Neither of us had much of a chance to hold our baby after he was born, especially once we brought him home. My mother and grandma doted on him constantly, and they both snapped endless pictures of him to send everyone back home, to the point I was afraid he would go blind before he could even properly see. At night, after everyone had turned in, I would sit at the end of the bed and stare at him. What at once seemed like such a small bassinet now looked enormous with his tiny form inside. I would wait until he stirred for his midnight feeding, and carry him from the room before his cries woke Bella, give him his bottle and check his diaper, and then finally head to bed myself. The exhaustion that came along with having a brand new baby was totally made worth it when I would come home every night and see his little face looking back at me and Bella's beautiful and proud smile. When my mother and grandmother returned home after 3 weeks of staying with us, I was both relieved and nervous. I was grateful to them for coming out to help us and would miss them a lot. But I was also looking forward to the time with just my new little family as well. However, it was just me and Bella alone for the first time since our son was born, and we needed to adjust to the routine of splitting duties just between the two of us. Bella would be fine, I knew that. She was an excellent mother that seemed to know exactly what to do pretty much all the time, just by gut and instinct. Everything else, she'd learned well from observing and asking questions of my mom and grandma. Me, I was still clueless about half the time, and I was the king of trial and error the remainder of it. Just when I thought I'd gotten the hang of changing diapers when he was just over a month old, I received my first shower compliments of my son. By the 8th or 9th attempt at dodging that precision stream of his, I began to believe that either Bella had some super stealth method to this, or my kid had it out for me, as it never happened to her. At 6 weeks, I finally relented, swallowing my pride and asking Bella about it. Baby, you have to keep him covered until you have the clean diaper ready, especially with the air conditioner on now. Cool air hits down there, and it's like Old Faithful, she replied, trying to hide her smirk. I told you to read the books. A book actually says that? I asked with wide eyes. Well, not exactly that, but the same general idea, she said, laughing at me as she shook her head and left the room. I looked down at my son, lying on the towel next to me on the couch with a clean diaper, and wipes right beside him. I narrowed my eyes at him playfully, and I swore he laughed at me, kicking his legs excitedly. Bella swore that wouldn't come for a while, and I assured her that she was wrong. I see that look in your eye, son. We are both going to be dry by the end of this deal. I heard Bella's sigh from the kitchen, but I began unfolding the clean diaper with a raised eyebrow, never taking my gaze off of him. I'm watching you, kiddo. Don't get any ideas, I said, bringing my fingers to the first tab and pulling it loose, and he shrieked. See, Bella, I told you. He's laughing at me. He knows. Edward, just stop and do what I said, Bella groaned, coming to the doorway and watching me with a hand on her hip. It's a tried and true method. After giving Edge my best Robert De Niro, meet the parents' impression only succeeding in making those little feet kick faster, I removed the other tab and lowered the front of the diaper. Edward, what? Bella started, covering her mouth as our son signaled his intent to pee, and I quickly covered him back over. Ha, foiled your plans, little man, I said, leaning forward to brush my nose on his, making him blink and scrunch his face in response. After checking to make sure he was done, I grabbed the wipe and cleaned him as fast as I could, and got the new diaper on. See, I told you, Bella said from her stance beside me, having crossed the room in the meantime. I looked up to her, and she bent at the waist to kiss me, clicking her tongue at our son playfully and tickling his neck as she passed us again. He began breathing faster in excitement with the attention from her and the sound of his mother's voice, and his little mouth opened and closed in quick succession. I lifted him from the couch and held him up in front of me, and the most adorable grin spread across his face with his little tongue poking out between them. Oh yeah, you've been busted, buddy. You see your mom and you start smacking your lips. I laughed and then lowered him to my chest, covering him with the blanket hanging over the arm of the couch. I pressed my lips to the top of his head as his little body nestled against me and whispered, "Can't say that I blame you, kid. So do I, though definitely for other reasons. But the doctor says I have to wait at least another week." Edward, Bella called out in a shrill voice from the next room. You will not say those things to our baby. Despite the swift and easy delivery of our son, Bella had experienced some tearing that was not recovering quite as quickly as her doctor would have liked, so the after-the-birth drought was still on in addition to the one before it, and my manly goods were in agony. No amount of showers and alone time with myself could take the place of a touch from my wife. However, between the tenderness of her breasts from nursing, the exhaustion of being a new mother, and our son's presence in the bassinet beside the bed, it was very difficult to get Bella in the mood for much of anything intimate. The one time I actually felt her touch me beneath the fabric of my sleep pants, Edge had woken up and begun to cry, not settling down again for over an hour. By the time Bella returned to bed, we both had to get to sleep, so we merely kissed goodnight. 10 weeks, baby, I replied softly against my son's hair. There's gotta be a medal for that or something. You really are such a man sometimes, Bella answered with a chuckle as she entered the room again, reaching out to take Edge. I'm going to get him down for the night. Your dinner is on the table. Good night, buddy, I whispered and brushed my lips on his cheek as she lifted him into her arms. Standing quickly, I tugged the back of her shirt as she began to walk away and kissed her. When she turned her head to look back at me, I'm kidding. Bella laughed softly and shook her head. No, you're not. Okay, maybe, but not completely serious either, I replied with a small sigh. Much better. Now, go eat, Bella said, patting my cheek gently before returning her hand to the baby and walking down the hall with him. After dinner, I sat down on the couch to watch television while I waited for Bella to get him settled for the night before turning in myself. The soft baby gurgles slowly began to quiet, and I'd even begun to drift off a bit. My head leaned back and my eyes closed. Not passing out on me, are you, soldier? I heard Bella's soft voice as she entered the living room. I shook my head slowly in response. Nope, just resting my eyes, I swear. Good, she murmured, and I finally opened my eyes, watching her as she lowered into my lap in nothing but a silk bathrobe. Her lips met mine sensually and I groaned, wrapping my arms around her waist and whimpering as her hip pressed against my groin. Baby, we can't. Your doctor said no, I said, swallowing hard and willing away the beginnings of a throbbing erection. He said no sex, she whispered against my lips, sucking lightly at my bottom one. He said nothing about taking a shower with my husband. My mouth opened in surprise, and I moaned as she sealed hers over it, her tongue gliding along mine once before pulling away. My fingers curled around her hip and my lips followed hers, seeking that contact again. Like any other red-blooded, married man that was very much in love with his wife, I had missed having sex with her badly. Yet, I also wasn't ashamed to admit that I missed the intimacy with Bella as well, the connection of more than just our bodies. Feeling that closeness of my wife in my arms, her skin against mine, kissing her, touching her, I needed that more than anything. Baby, monitor, she finished, waving the device already in one hand and rising from my lap, weaving the fingers of her other between mine. Come on, before he wakes up. I stood to join her, and her hands began making work on my belt, tugging me backward down the hall with her, as if I really needed convincing. After lifting my shirt from my body, I took her face between my hands and sealed my lips over hers as she slid my pants over my hips. Bella pushed the door closed behind us and set the monitor on the edge of the sink, reaching over to turn on the shower, and ridding me of my boxers as well. Get in. I stepped under the spray and reached out for her, causing her to laugh and tell me to wait. Baby, the water will get cold, and Edge is going to wake up. Bella took a deep breath and nodded, gazing at me nervously, as if she'd just realized the flaw in her plan. I had yet to see my wife naked, since she gave birth to our son. Her eyes lowered to the floor as she tugged at the belt of her robe, closing them when she slid the fabric from her shoulders to pool at her feet. With her hesitant steps, I ran my own eyes over her and swallowed hard. She did look different, softer, fuller, even with the minimal weight she'd gained throughout her pregnancy. She was a mother. That amazing body had given me the most beautiful gift anyone ever had. I took her hand and guided her into the shower with me, sliding the curtain closed and blocking out the rest of the world for just a few minutes. You're so fucking beautiful, Bella. I love you, I whispered, cupping her cheek and kissing her passionately, her arms wrapping tightly around me. I did. God, I loved the woman in my arms so damn much, it hurt. And I was completely happy just to stand there, holding and kissing her, feeling the strands of her hair dampen between my fingers and her hands running over my back. However, my wife had other ideas. Bella's tongue flicked against my lower lip, and I opened my eyes to find hers already staring back at me. A small grin made its way to her features, and her fingers slid between us, encircling my length, and a long shuddering breath escaped me. I've missed you, Edward. Her whispered words brought my gaze back to hers, despite the sensations coursing through my body at her touch. There was a look in her eyes that went far beyond physical need. We'd always been so close, so intimate even without sexual acts. Her pregnancy and the subsequent birth of our son had shifted that slightly. We both loved our child to the ends of the earth, and so much attention had been centered on him in the past 6 weeks since he'd been born, we'd had very little time to focus on each other. The moment we were sharing right then had next to nothing to do with her hand around me, stroking me, or even when she lowered to her knees to take me into her mouth. It wasn't about us as parents. We were finding Edward and Bella again. And that, we did. Even after I'd reached physical release, I helped her to her feet and held her under the pulsing spray until the water ran cold and our son called us back to the world outside. Bella, I called out to her as she grabbed the monitor on her way to the door, securing a towel around my waist and stepping toward her. She gazed at me questioningly, and I brought my hand to her face, kissing her gently. I've missed you, too. Watching our son grow over the passing weeks was nothing short of amazing. Each day, I would come home and he would seem to be doing something new and different and becoming more animated by the minute. Bella, on the other hand, was becoming noticeably more restless by the middle of July. Edge had just reached his 2nd month, and even when we were alone in the evenings she appeared distracted and never truly there with me. It seemed like I was losing my wife a little bit at a time and it scared me. Then one night, we were sitting on the couch with her head resting on my shoulder while watching a movie when she suddenly sat up beside me. She fiddled with her fingers in her lap with her eyes lowered, but then suddenly reached for the remote on the coffee table and clicked the television off. Edward, we need to talk, Bella said as she shifted on the cushion to face me, resting her arm along the back of the couch and propping her head on her hand. I held my breath and nodded, folding my arms over my chest and turning toward her in preparation for whatever it was that she was about to say. Okay, is something wrong? Bella shook her head while never lifting her eyes. No, I don't think so. Well, I know I said that any decision that affected us as a family needed to be made as a family from now on. And I haven't really made one yet, but I've been looking and I want to talk about it. My throat began constricting and I reached over to take her hand. Alright, if nothing is wrong, can you please look at me? It seems like you're trying to find a way to tell me some really bad news. Bella finally met my gaze with hers, squeezing my hand gently and offering me a small smile. No, it's nothing bad. I've just been looking into some things, and I'm not sure how you're going to feel about it right now, especially with the new baby and all. Just talk to me, baby, I said softly, tucking her hair behind her ear. You can tell me anything, you know that. Bella nodded and ran her tongue over her lips, taking a deep breath and steadying herself. I've been looking online about going back to school. Don't get me wrong, I love being your wife, and becoming a mother has been an experience that I never imagined I would enjoy this much, or that I would even be any good at it. And I feel horrible for saying this, but that's not all I want to be. Before you re-enlisted and we had Edge, it was different. I figured I would just wait until you were done and we went home before I thought about school. It seemed to make sense to wait, but things have changed considerably since then, obviously. It's not horrible at all, Bella. So you want to go back to school? What is wrong with that? Honestly, there are a lot worse things you could be looking into online, I replied in a teasing tone, raising my eyebrow at her. Okay, I don't even want to imagine where your mind went with that, just by that expression on your face, Bella said with a roll of her eyes, but the tension in her features began visibly lessening. It's too late to think about this semester, and Edge is still so little, and with me breastfeeding, it might make going to school, homework and studying a little difficult right now, but I'd like to look into the spring semester. He should be starting solids and everything by then, and make things a little easier to split things up between the two of us. I won't be looking at a full course load or anything, but a few core classes, and I could get financial aid. I've been looking into several options online, both government and military. Baby, you don't have to sell me on this. You want to go back to school, then go. Even if you wanted to go back now, I'd be fine with that. We'd figure out a way to make it happen, I replied, running my fingers over the back of her hand. And actually, it's a bit of a relief. You've been so quiet lately, and I'd be lying if I said I haven't been a little worried. I want you to be happy, Bella. Bella smiled and leaned toward me, brushing her lips on mine. I am happy, Edward. I'm sorry I worried you. I just had a lot on my mind. I know some of the other husbands don't really like the idea of their wives having careers, especially once kids come along. And I don't want to sound ungrateful for you or our son, but I can't see myself just being a homemaker for the rest of my life. That's not what I want. You know I'm not one of those husbands. Whatever it is that you do want, whether it's school or a job, or even if you did want to stay home with our kid, I'm not going to sit here and ask you to stand behind me if I'm not willing to do the same for you, I said, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. I'm glad you said that, Bella replied, lowering her eyes again and taking another deep breath before looking back to me again. Because I'd like to go to work in another month or so. Nothing full-time that would take me away from the baby or you too much, just a few hours, a couple days a week. Not that I don't think you can provide for us, I just want to contribute and do my part for this family, and it would be really good for me as well. After almost 2 years, I'm going more than a little stir-crazy. My eyebrows rose and I began nodding my head. You want to work, already? Edward, Bella growled, breathing in deeply through her nose. You just said you were okay with it, so don't you start backtracking now th. I cut her off by pressing my lips to hers and she groaned in frustration, lightly slapping my back as she wrapped her arm around me. I lowered her back to lie on the couch, settling my body on top of hers and feeling her hands clench tightly on my shirt. And you say I'm way too easy to rile up. If you're ready to go to work, baby, and that's what you want, then do it. I'm sure between you, me, and your friends, we can figure everything out with Edge. Bella's lips tightened and her nose crinkled at the bridge, raising her fist between us, and I could only laugh at how adorable she looked. There are times I really hate you. You can be such a jerk sometimes. I know, I whispered, smirking slightly before meeting her mouth with mine again, and groaning as I felt her hands run down my back and into the back pockets of my jeans. How long has the baby been asleep? Bella smiled against my lips and pulled my hips forward, grinding them against her. About an hour. I cleared my throat and rocked my body over hers in response, moaning softly with the motion. Do you think we have time to? Oh, I definitely think we have time to, she whispered, sliding her hands up my back again, beneath my shirt. Since she'd gotten her clearance from the doctor about a week before, we had only managed to make love once. It was rushed and desperate after so long without each other, and over way too soon. Yet, before we could make another attempt, Edge had woken up, so sex was off the table. Since then, between the exhaustion from my day when I got home from work and Bella being worn out from hers, our son's irregular sleep pattern of late, and barely kissing goodnight before our heads hit the pillow most nights, we hadn't found the opportunity again. However, it was Saturday. She took the night shift feedings and wakings while I slept, and I'd handled the daytime ones while she napped that afternoon. We were both slightly more rested than usual, and from the feel of her arching beneath me and pressing her body to mine, she needed me just as badly as I needed her. Bella clamped her legs around my hips as I attempted to rise, pulling me back to her. You're wasting precious seconds. I groaned at her words and kissed her heatedly as she began sliding my shirt up my back. Here? Well, we haven't had the chance to christen this living room, now have we? And Edge will eventually gain mobility, so we should take advantage of no walk-in interruptions while we can, especially during couch sex, Bella whispered huskily against my lips, discarding my shirt to the floor beside us. Oh shit, I rasped with a heavy exhale, instantly feeling the strain against my jeans as I glided my hand along her side to lift her nightshirt up her body. I kissed along her sternum as she pulled it over her head and then sat back on my calves, gazing down at my beautiful wife. Bella wriggled impatiently as I slowly guided her underwear over her hips and down her legs, and then stood to divest myself of my jeans and boxers. She reached out for my hand, encouraging me to come back to her, which I did after a soft kiss to her hip bone, and with her other, she sought out my length between us. Wrapping her fingers around me, she traced my tip along her warm, soft skin, and we both echoed each other's moans at the intense sensation it stirred within each of us before positioning me against her. I need you so bad, baby. I watched her face as I pressed inside her, the way her forehead creased and her eyes pinched closed, adjusting to the feel of our bodies joining again. Doing okay? Bella nodded, tracing her fingertips along my biceps and opening her eyes to gaze up at me. Oh yeah, I'm great. Her answering smile was reassuring as was her soft, contented sigh when our lips met. Her eyes opened and looked up at me, and her hands curled around my shoulders. I love you so much, baby. I love you too, she whispered, brushing my lips with a gentle kiss and lifting her hips from the couch to mine in silent request. I began to move inside her and rested my forehead on hers, losing myself in the feel of her around me, and taking in every second of that time. Her fingertips pressed into my skin more with each thrust, followed by the grunts of pleasure I had missed so much. Bella was still so intoxicating when we made love. Having a baby hadn't changed that at all. Bella clenched around me, and I sucked in a sharp breath, groaning as she dragged her nails down my back. The sudden pinch of them on my ass caused my eyes to tighten, and my lips to press to her brow when she began guiding me in and out of her more quickly. "Please, Edward, I'm so close and it's been too long, I need it." Lifting up on my elbow, I angled my hips to drive into her deeper, and brought my other hand between us to massage her just above where we were joined. A guttural groan escaped her, and her arms rose to grip the arm of the couch above her head, arching her back as her toes dug into my calves. She began verbally coaxing on her orgasm through clenched teeth, and then her eyes flew open and rolled back with a string of profanities leaving her. My hand moved to grip her hip as she slowly relaxed afterward, and my lips met hers fiercely, feeling my own creeping up quickly. Bella's fingertips gripped my shoulders, and her legs wrapped around me as my pace intensified, stilling when I finally released inside her. She whimpered as I settled on top of her, wincing slightly when my chest met hers. "Just a little tender from earlier, baby, that's all." I shifted my body off her to lie between her and the couch, wrapping my arms around her with the quilt from above us, and kissing her neck. She snuggled back into my embrace, her fingertips running over the back of my hand resting on her abdomen as I whispered in her ear, "It's a good thing we did stay out here. That mouth of yours is definitely inappropriate for such innocent ears." Bella laughed, weaving her fingers between mine, and turning her head to meet my lips with hers. "Well then it's a good thing those ears will be in their own room soon. But it's all your fault, you know." "Oh really?" I replied, quirking an eyebrow at her. "And how do you figure that?" "I was completely sweet and innocent until you corrupted me with this body of yours," she quipped with a smirk against my lips, shifting her hips back into me. "You thoroughly ruined me." I chuckled, gripping her hand with mine and kissing along her cheek to her ear. "I didn't hear you complaining. In fact, I seem to remember the corruption being invited by a certain young lady climbing into my bed that night." "A girl knows a good thing when she sees it," she whispered, sliding her fingers from between mine to trace along the back of my neck. "Never said I was complaining. I'm still so glad it was you, and only you. Even when I'm a jerk?" I murmured against her hair, flattening my palm over her stomach. "Yeah, even then, as long as you don't make a habit of it," Bella replied with a giggle. "I'm looking forward to enjoying this body and the incredible man attached to it for a good long time." I hummed softly as I kissed down her neck and sucked lightly at her collarbone, enjoying the feel of her bare skin beneath my touch. "Think I can corrupt you one last time before bed?" As much as I would love to say yes, I'm sure someone will have an objection to that very soon, and we'd have to stop. "Don't think he would be so understanding that mommy is busy being ravaged by daddy," she mumbled against my temple, pressing her lips to it softly. "Could you just hold me for a while instead?" I lifted my head, noticing the dip in her voice, and saw a tear slip from the corner of her eye. "Bella, I'm fine, really. I don't know why I'm still doing this. You'd think my hormones would have regulated by now, and I'd stop crying over nothing," Bella answered with a frustrated sigh, brushing her fingers over her cheek. "This is one thing that makes me glad that we won't be having another baby for at least 5 more years." I tightened my arms around her and nestled my face into her neck. Shortly after Edge's birth, we began discussing birth control options with her doctor. As much as we loved our son, we both agreed that we didn't wish to add to our family again for a few more years, preferably after he started kindergarten. We didn't want to return to the pill since she'd gotten pregnant on one anyway, and none of the other conventional methods seemed to appeal to either of us much, so we opted for the IUD. However, that was the first mention that she was actually relieved that we weren't having any more children for a while. "You do still want more someday, don't you?" I inquired in curiosity, and I felt her shift in my arms slightly. "Believe me, I'm not in any rush and still getting the hang of it this time around, and I love Edge more than anything in this world, right up there with you. And you'd like a daughter someday, even with the risk of gray hair," Bella finished for me as I struggled to get the words out myself. I held on to her and shrugged one shoulder, kissing hers as we lay there silently for several moments. "Give me a few years, so I can go back to school and get myself a little more on my own feet as well, and for us to be a little more certain of what the future holds, and we'll talk about it. Army or no army, no surprises next time. We can always have the device removed if we change our minds and both want another baby. But I also just want time to enjoy our little boy, too. I'm totally channeling my dad right now. But it's time we'll never get back once it's gone." I nodded against her and then lifted my head again, ghosting my fingertips over her cheek and kissing her gently. I know, just checking and making sure having mini-me in there hasn't scared you off. Bella released a breathy laugh and shook her head. No, he is totally worth every worship of the porcelain goddess, the heartburn, the aching back, the mood swings and crying, and even missing my husband for the last 12 weeks. And I'd gladly do it all over again when we're ready for it. Sounds like a plan, beautiful, I replied, nuzzling my nose against her neck and laying my head on her chest, enjoying the last few moments of peace and quiet with her before our son would likely wake. I really do love you, you know. Bella's arms tightened around me, and she kissed the top of my head, her nails dragging lightly through my hair. Yes, I do, always have, and I love you too. Edward had turned out to be a really good father, just as I thought he would. He was so enamored with our son from the moment he was born, and it only grew as time passed, rather than fading with the novelty of a new baby. His involvement in taking care of Edge had surprised me, but very pleasantly. Changing diapers, taking shifts with me when the baby's cries echoed throughout the night, feeding him while I would make dinner. He never once really complained, no matter how exhausted I knew he was, and never made excuses. And Edge was definitely a daddy's boy. The way he would brighten the instant he heard Edward's voice as he came through the door. The giggles and shrieks I would hear while he interacted with his father on the couch each night. And the way he would snuggle into his dad's chest and fall asleep. It was all so endearing that it melted my heart, though I'd admit, it made me a little jealous as well. I knew it was really stupid to feel that way over such a good thing, and I was glad that they shared a bond like that. It wasn't as if I didn't have my own special moments with our son as well, since I was home alone with him all day, and I tried to keep that in mind. Bath time was something that was still exclusively my time with him, since it was the only thing that Edward was still terrified to do on his own. The mere thought of losing his grip on the slippery baby and Edge falling under the water sent a surge of panic through him that nothing I said seemed to quell. I could never convince him that it was highly unlikely with the angle of the baby tub and the low level of water within it. He only seemed to remember being told in health class at one point that it only took an inch of water for someone to drown, or even just inhaling enough water to disrupt breathing. His overzealous protectiveness of our child really blew my mind at times, but he insisted it was better to be overcautious than overconfident, and I couldn't really argue with that. What surprised me the most since giving birth to Edge, however, was the restlessness I began to feel at times. Being a mom was the best and most important job I knew I would ever have, and I really did love it. But I started feeling the itch for something more only weeks after he was born. I never said anything to Edward about it. I didn't want him to feel that I thought he wasn't providing enough for us, or that parenting was something I didn't want to do. I just wasn't one of those wives who were content to simply keep house and pop out babies, while my husband was out busting his ass every day. Besides that, I also wanted to maintain my own identity, as well as my roles as wife and mother. In the almost 2 years since I'd married Edward and then began to intermingle myself with the other wives as well, I'd seen and heard things that I never wanted to happen in my own marriage. Infidelity was the last thing I ever worried about when it came to us. I would never want another man to touch me as only Edward ever had, and I had complete faith in his devotion to me as well. Yet, even including Emma, most of them seemed completely content to sit home, sip tea, gossip and raise babies, and that was one thing I did not share in common with them, and refused to conform on. Wife and mother was great, but there was also still a Bella within me, and I never wanted to completely lose that. I'd given occasional thought over my time there in Virginia with Edward as to what I would like to do when I finally went back to school. Then after his re-enlistment, I would confess it did shift to something that would be a portable career that I could transfer almost anywhere, no matter where we lived. However, it also needed to be something I would enjoy as well. It hit me one day while I was over at Emma's house. Edge was sound asleep in the playpen, and I was sitting on the floor with Simon, the 4-year-old son of one of the other wives, showing him how to draw a puppy with simple shapes. He responded so well to me, and despite his young age, he managed to follow my instruction with a fair amount of proficiency. "Look, I did it, Miss Bella," he exclaimed proudly, holding it up when he finished, and then ran to his mother to show off his accomplishment. "I love art, and I enjoyed interacting with children. Why not combine the two? Teachers or even daycare providers are needed everywhere, aren't they?" So I began looking online into options for a degree in early childhood education, but still felt nervous about mentioning it to Edward. Not that I believed he would truly object, but we'd never really talked about it since we got married, and not at all since my pregnancy and the birth of our baby. I wasn't sure how much, if at all, his views had altered with all the changes in our lives, as some of my friends told me had happened with their husbands after the babies came. And then there was the fact that I wanted to work. Edward didn't make a lot of money, but we were far from struggling. I'd become an expert coupon clipper, more so since Edge was born, and my mother-in-law had been a huge help in sending me tips and recipes to keep us on a manageable budget. I really loved SM, so I really didn't need to work, especially with a still relatively new baby at home to take care of. But I sincerely wanted to. For a week, I pondered in silence, unintentionally distancing myself from him, while I definitively decided what it was that I wanted, until I realized I just couldn't do it anymore. Aside from the fact that we'd agreed that we would make important decisions like that together from now on, I missed him. I'd gotten the okay from my doctor to resume sexual activity, and I'd made love to my husband once in an entire week. New baby or not, after 11 weeks of abstinence, once was not enough in 7 days. I didn't want to be surprised at his response to either of my aspirations, but with all I'd been bracing myself for in preparation for it, I was, nonetheless. I was so relieved, I couldn't even be convincingly mad at him for teasing me. With the air finally cleared between us, both of our worries alleviated, that relief seemed to simmer into a deep, mutual desire for one another. It had been so long since I'd felt something that strong, and I wanted to harness and embrace it as much as I possibly could. Naturally, I'd missed him and the intimacy we hadn't been able to share in what felt like forever, and even enjoyed the shower we'd taken together and our one attempt at lovemaking. However, my sex drive had been nothing even close to what it was in the first year of our marriage, before pregnancy and parenthood had tamed it significantly. I wanted to make my husband happy and keep him satisfied in that way, but especially since giving birth, there was very little time for even a simple touch most nights. And I really could not bring myself to want anything in return. It was upsetting. We were far too young for our sex life to diminish like that. Yet, the instant I felt his body over me that evening and his lips moving against mine, and then that groan rumbling in his throat when my hands slid into his back pockets, I felt a jolt of arousal for the gorgeous man I'd married that I hadn't in months. His want for me as well was obvious as he rocked his hips against me, and if he hadn't inquired about making love, I definitely would have. I soaked in every sensation, movement, and sound shared between us, and I hadn't felt anything that intense between us in so long. It overwhelmed me. I held him tighter, kissed him deeper, unwilling to even let him go long enough to go to our bed. I wanted him, immediately. It felt so good to want him that much again, and the moment he pressed inside me, I tensed with the sensation of it. But I needed more. Even though we were on the couch, it was still the most intimate time we'd shared together, since right after we found out I was pregnant. I begged him with my body and words, guiding his motions with my hands until he took over, and gave me exactly what I was aching for. When he joined me a few short moments later, he settled his chest on mine and I winced, my breast still tender from pumping earlier, but I wanted him to stay close to me. I hated that thing and still hadn't gotten used to it. But I knew it was necessary, so that Edward could be involved in feeding our son as well. All too soon, even after our light conversation afterward and his arms around me, I felt my mood shifting, and before I knew it, I was in tears. I'd been fighting so hard against postpartum depression after Edge's birth, determined to feel nothing but joy in our son, but there were times when it caught up with me anyway. Yet mentioning to Edward that I was relieved that we wouldn't be having another baby for at least a few more years had a very odd and unexpected effect on him. He wanted more children, and I could see it in his eyes, and hear it in his voice, that as much as he loved his son, he wanted a daughter someday, too. A little girl to pamper and spoil as only a daddy could. It struck me as strange considering that before me, he hadn't wanted children at all, especially in the army. Edge's birth had changed him so much. He loved being a dad more than I could have ever hoped for. I could imagine having a house full of kids with him one day, just not quite yet. Our first child was barely 2 months old, and my pregnancy was still wreaking havoc on me long after it was done. And I really didn't want to think about trying to balance a job, school, and 2 young children all at once. It was too much for me and for Edward, and I also wanted our next child to be planned, with our lives more certain than they were at that moment. Fortunately, it seemed that Edward and I agreed on that aspect. We would have another baby when we were both ready and enjoy our time with Edge for the next few years. For all my anxiousness to do so, going to work for the first time proved to be harder than I thought it would be. A few weeks later, I was getting ready to leave for my first day at a small restaurant just off post when Edward got home that evening, and he paused at the sight of me. I stood in the middle of our living room, holding Edge in my arms and bawling my eyes out. I'm such a horrible mother. Edward rushed over and slid his arms around both of us, kissing my forehead and rubbing my back. You are far from a horrible mother, Bella. Why would you say that? How can I leave him? He's still so little and he needs his mom. What if he starts crying for me? And I'm not here for him. He's never been away from me. I can't do this, Edward, I sobbed, settling my cheek on top of my baby's head. That doesn't make you a bad mom, baby. It makes you a very good one, he replied, and I lifted my eyes to him when he pulled away with his hands resting on my shoulders. You can do this, and you'll be right back here with him before you know it. And until then, he'll be hanging out with his dad. I swear, there will be absolutely no parties or strippers in your absence. I knew Edward was trying to calm me by lightening the mood, but I only cried harder, holding my son more securely to me. It's too soon. I'm doing this too soon. I'm not ready. Bella, look at me, Edward said, taking my face in his hands and kissing me gently. The first time is always going to be the hardest, whether it's now or 6 months from now. And you want this, even if you can't see it at the moment. It's all about taking the first step. I nodded hesitantly and looked down to my son's little face gazing up at me. Okay, mommy loves you, and I'll be back just as soon as I can. It won't be long, I promise. I'll miss you every second. Bella, Edward murmured, and I looked to him where he was holding his hands out for our baby. First step. I pressed my lips to Edge's hair, rocking him back and forth. It's so hard. I never thought it would be this hard. I know it is, baby. I didn't want to leave that first day, either, remember? He asked and I released a heavy sigh. Edward did have difficulty getting out the door for the first time after our son came home. He woke early that morning to feed and hold him for a while before he had to leave, and it took me, his mother, and his grandmother to finally extract the baby from his arms and almost literally shove him out of the house. And since then, he'd adjusted to leaving in the morning, knowing we'd be there waiting for him when he got home, just as they would be for me. Okay, 4 hours. I can do 4 hours, I answered in an unconvincing, trembling voice with fresh tears flowing down my face. I shifted the baby in my arms to hand him over to Edward and stroked his soft hair with my fingers. I just fed him, so he should be good for a while. There's bottles ready in the fridge. The restaurant number is on the emergency list on the counter. Make sure he's in bed no later than 8, or he'll start getting really cranky. Honey, Edward interrupted my bouncing Edge lightly as our son snuggled into his chest. I'm his dad. I've done this before and we're going to be fine. Try not to worry too much, call if you need to, and have a good night. I closed my eyes as he kissed me again and nodded, turning toward the door, only to double back one more time to press my lips to Edge's cheek. Say bye, mommy. Have a good first day, Edward said in a slightly higher pitch than normal, laughing as I glared at him. Go on, you don't want to be late. And I love you too. I love you. I groaned with his teasing that I hadn't said as much to him the whole time, but chuckled as I kissed him too. You know that. And so does he. Now come on, start stepping, Edward replied, nodding toward the door and nudging me gently. I cried all the way to work and sat in the parking lot for a couple of minutes, trying to collect myself. When I glanced into my rearview mirror, I groaned at the sight of my red swollen eyes and the dried tear tracks on my cheeks. I hurried inside to the bathroom to wash my face before I clocked in, but still garnered strange looks from the few patrons there when I emerged. Bella, a soft voice spoke behind me, and I turned quickly to find a tall blonde standing there, and I nodded. Hi, I'm Heidi. I'll be training you tonight and probably for the next couple of weeks since I practically live here. Nice to meet you, I replied nervously and held my hand out to shake hers. How old is your baby? Heidi asked and I tilted my head in question. There's only a couple reasons for that look. A fight with your man, or leaving your baby for the first time. And you're not mad enough for the first. I was the same way when I went back to work after my first was born. My boyfriend had to physically remove me from the car when he dropped me off. I gave a soft laugh and looked down. Just over 3 months. Yup. That will do it. Don't worry, I promise to keep you so busy that the time will fly. Dinner rush will help, Heidi replied with an understanding smile, and immediately began my training. Time didn't exactly fly for the next few hours, but it didn't drag as much as I thought it would either. Yet, the instant I was outside those doors, I was aching to be back with my husband and baby again. "It will get easier with time," she said to me just before I left that night, and I knew she was probably right. It was just hard to see when I got home and threw my arms around Edward and forced myself not to pick up my sleeping son from his crib and wake him. At the same time, I felt good about getting out of the house for a few hours and feeling productive, even though it was only my first day. "Nothing to feel bad about in that, baby," Edward reassured me as we lay in bed that night and he kissed my forehead. "I'm very proud of you, Bella. You really are an amazing woman." Ended next episodes here.